All right, welcome to the Sae Bae cast number 249 with TheoryWise. TheoryWise, how are we doing this morning?
Very well. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Very much looking forward to this. I want to start off with just a brief introduction of who you are as a content creator and maybe as a player.
Sure, no problem at all. I'm TheoryWise, and I'm a chronic yapper, so feel free to cut me off if I'm going on too long. I started content creation around, well, less than a year ago, maybe like 10 months, 11 months ago at this point. And I was mainly cataloging my journey into Old School Runescape, having quit WoW 2 to 3 years ago at this point. And I'm just really big into writing and I talk too much. My friends can attest to this. And I figured, why not just kind of dip my toe into content creation and just get my thoughts out there so I never feel the need to repeat myself to my friends like 3 in the morning during a Discord call. So that's kind of where it all began. And since then, I really found a lot of joy in just discovering the depths of game design and analysis through the lens of like RuneScape, because that's the game I'm currently playing, but just also talking about other games and relating them and discussing just what keeps people playing, why do they play games, what is so attractive about fletching a crossbow or not a I guess a bow stock, or stringing a bow or making arrow shafts or whatever people are doing in old school right now. Like, what is so addicting about that? And that's kind of what drives me a little bit.
Lovely. So you've only been playing old school for how long?
I started in February of 2024. Although I will say I do have a little bit of history with RuneScape. I think I played old school in like 2015 for like a few months, but just to clarify how, I was kind of just running around. I had like 50 quest points, had like level 70 Slayer, and that's my only stat that was like above 30 apart from my combat. So I really just a decade ago I did some stuff. I played a tiny bit of RuneScape 3 as well, but that's a whole maybe that's a topic for a different time. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. Actually, that's shocking that 2015 is a decade ago. Jesus.
I
Like
know,
that's
right? I don't like saying that.
that's when I started old school. So it's actually been, I think September will mark 10 years for me of playing old school. So
What? Happy anniversary.
thank you.
Yeah.
So let's, I guess I want to first touch on just how crazy it is that old school is concurrently getting an average of like 200,000 players. Like, what is happening? That is
Yeah,
wild.
it's super exciting. I'm sure it's as exciting for content creators as it is for people playing the game. And I think people often, especially maybe more jaded people, maybe more cynical people, can say, "Oh, it's all bots or whatever." But bots generally increase in proportion to the amount of players that increase. There's very rare that you get way more bots than players. It doesn't make economic sense for that to be the case. And so, regardless of what you think the bot averages are, we clearly are getting more players, obviously. And that's very exciting. It's exciting for the content creation scene. It's exciting for just seeing people in the open world, exploring the game, and just not engaging in just like the narrow sliver of content that I think oftentimes tends to define the game for a lot of longtime players. So it's been incredibly exciting.
Yeah. And how much of it do you think is due to the WoW streamers that have shifted over? I think there's like four big ones, maybe a few more. Guzu, Savix, and some others that have really just put the public eye on the game. How much of that do you think is being accounted for?
I think it's like a snowball. It started rolling, and RuneScape has been growing for 2 years now. Like, I mean, it's been growing since its release, I guess you could say, but it had these ups and downs, COVID bump, decrease. But for the past 2 years, from what we can see in the graph, that one website that catalogs it over the years since release, it's just kind of had this upward trend for the past 2 years, and that snowball started rolling, I think, and some WoW players really caught on to that. Me being one of them, and I think Matt Season is another WoW creator that has this series where he's playing the game unguided. It's very funny and great. We kind of caught on to that. I think Caritas as well caught on to that. And then some other WoW creators that are streamers caught on to like, hey, this game is more buzz. More buzz is happening about this game. And everyone's aware of RuneScape. Everybody knows. If they play WoW for 15 years, you know what RuneScape is because this is our arch nemesis essentially from 15, 20 years ago. So it's very much like a snowball that they jumped into, and now it's becoming bigger and bigger thanks to them. So very synergetic in that way.
And what exactly is it? Is it the fact that old school is so great, or is it the fact that WoW is not as great? Is it just WoW's kind of failing?
I think that it's compounding. Like I think WoW right now is on a content lull. It doesn't have so this. I'm not sure. I actually don't know how aware are you of the WoW situation. Like,
I'm
have you played it or?
I've never so I played it one day when I was a kid, but I've never actually like taken a deep dive into the game. But I've just heard rumors about like the way WoW works, at least not classic WoW, but just like I guess retail WoW or whatever it's called. I'm actually lost on some of like the names for it, but
Mhm.
basically it seems like every new expansion just eliminates all your like previous progress. Like it doesn't mean anything. And I think that's the thing where people are jaded by it and they like the idea of old school just having that nonstop permanent progression. But other than that, you'll have to explain.
Sure, yeah, no, gladly. And cut me off with any questions if you need. So right now there's three or arguably four different versions of World of Warcraft happening simultaneously. There's Retail WoW, which is like RuneScape 3. That's the modern client that continue to be updated with new stuff, and it's actually in a really, really dense content cadence right now. It's getting a new update every 66 days. A new raid every 120 odd days. It's very, very, very fast updates with that game, but it has its own set of issues. As you said, it's very seasonal. Every expansion, every patch completely resets you essentially. It's pretty nuts. That's its own separate beast to talk about. Then you have Classic WoW. There was the original incarnation of Classic WoW, like Old School RuneScape in 2019, but unlike Old School RuneScape, instead of just updating it with like new updates, having changes certain things, maybe making Zulrah and all that kind of stuff. Seeing where Old School RuneScape went afterward, they were just kind of going down the line of all the updates that Classic WoW had back in 2004. And then they released the first expansion, the Burning Crusade, and then the second, and then the third, now the fourth, and or fifth even. And the issue with that, though, is that while it might tap into some nostalgia, especially initially, and the original Classic WoW launch was enormous, uh, you're kind of just going to a place that made everyone who came back for Classic WoW quit again because they quit due to the changes you're implementing again into the game, thanks to releasing all these pre-existing expansions. So we're getting that. It's now in its like fourth or fifth expansion. I'm forgetting where Mr. Pandaria was. I think it's the fifth one. Um, Maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, and then on top of that, they have this like hyper seasonal version of the game called Season of Discovery, which just recently ended, and that's like a year-long version of classic WoW, kind of like Leagues is to old school RuneScape, where it's kind of like classic WoW but with a bunch of new mechanics and systems that did fairly well. And then on top of all of that, they also have a hardcore version of classic WoW that people play as well. You might have heard like OnlyFangs with soda poppins and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So there's four incarnations, four versions, and each one is kind of in its own individual has its own individual issues, and three of the four are currently in a big content lull. So that probably helps why people are kind of peeping out old school.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I mean, it feels like old school. I mean, I know I think literally tomorrow is when Varlamore 3 comes out, but it feels strange that at a random part in the summer, we just have this massive, I mean, seriously, 200,000 players. That's not even like necessarily just a one time little bump. I mean, it's been camped at high 100,000s and dipping into the 200,000s quite often in the last couple of weeks, which is just wild because it's not like we have seen Sailing drop right now or seen Varlamore 3 drop right now. It really is like weeks before a huge update, and we're already seeing that. So, do you sense that there's something old school is doing absolutely right that is getting people over, or is it just the disappointment and the update lulls with three of the four WoW versions that's really getting people over?
I would say there are two big, and there's a lot of things, but the two big things I'd point out is yes, there's the big content lull and the awareness of old school RuneScape, like the fact that everyone knows what it is. But the two, and this is something that I actually haven't seen a lot of people talk about yet, is how much work Jagex put into the past year making the early and mid game way better. Or I mean, you can say that's subjective, but as someone who has played through and seen what it was and all that kind of stuff. The early and the mid game now is very unique. It has a lot of different paths to take. Some of them are meta, some of them aren't. But there's just a lot more content now that represents what the end game of RuneScape is better than like, go do this quest, it skips this skill and blah blah blah. And all that's great. I like the early game, but Right now, they added things like Scurious, like Perilous Moons, like the new continent of Varlamore that give you alternatives to achieve the same, ends, but you're actually doing mechanics that aren't just like safe spotting a quest boss or I don't know what early game people do, just like do this janky old quest kind of thing. Like it's a lot more representative of what the game becomes, and I think what the game becomes in the mid game, especially, is really awesome. So people aren't bouncing off of RuneScape as quickly now. That's, I think, something that people are seeing and really resonating with. So I want to give credit to Jagex there. Scurious is like S tier in my opinion. It is the best piece of content in 2024. As crazy as that may sound, because I think Scurious, if Jagex did an even better job at pushing people to him, maybe through a small quest or something, uh, would be like the reason why people play the game. They're like, oh, this is actually way cooler than I thought. I thought it was just safe spotting and clicking and waiting. That's way crazier. And I think a lot of WoW players were like, oh, I thought RuneScape was clicking and waiting, clicking and waiting. But then they see PvP, they see clips of Oda Block, they see, Scurious or even Endgame PVM, and they're like, this is so much deeper than I thought. And that gives them motivation to continue playing. Yeah.
Yeah, Scurious really was a banger update. I will say, because just in the last year, I have made 2 fresh accounts. One was with Big Dogs, the group hardcore, and then my
Yep.
Iron Man that I'm playing now. And I did kill a decent amount of Scurious on both accounts, easily like 100 plus of it. And one of the saddest things I think they're missing, is just like a side tangent with Scurious in general, is just the lack of prayer. It feels like at that stage in the game, if you're an Iron Man, for example, you just don't have the prayer, and the advanced players would just go get some blighted restores or something and just use it in a PvP world or something. But it feels like that's the one element that's missing from Scurious, is some sort of altar there that heals your prayer, or maybe even some sort of passive prayer healing effect, because it really does feel like, if you're a new player, it's painful how quickly your prayer goes, because most players at that point don't even have 50 prayer, and they'll probably have to teleport to like the monastery and then back to Varrock or something. But yeah, overall,
Definitely.
Scurious
I
is
did
just
that
a
too.
phenomenal update. Yeah.
I remember doing Scurious. That's actually what got me. I would say doing Scurious is really what got me invested in the game. Having Scurious came out like a week after I started playing, or I should say that was January. So maybe, yeah, no, a week after, a week or two after I started playing, and that was like the first thing I really wanted to do, because I'm like, oh, it's early game, very much. It's the first thing I really kind of wanted to explore in the game, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, teleporting out to Ferox, especially, and going back to Varrock definitely wasn't ideal. I think they kind of solved it too with Perilous Moons. That's a whole different thing.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe some people disagree with me. Some people hate Perilous Moons. I think Perilous Moons is like a genius update on so many different levels, as a sequel to Barrows, especially. And the way you're so self-sustaining in Perilous Moons really gives new players that satisfaction of being able to camp a boss without feeling like they're draining supplies. And that's something that's so satisfying in the early game that you don't necessarily have to worry about as much in the mid and late game.
Yeah. Perilous Moons, I think, was the biggest patch where, okay, mid game is officially solidified. It feels like that alone really put the mid game in a really great spot. And honestly, it's actually shocking how well they did with at least the gear balancing, because on some level it's almost OP, but at the
Yeah.
same time it's just over the edge. I feel like it's not OP, it's just a little bit overtuned to the point where it actually is very incentivized to go do. But it's not undertuned where it is something that just doesn't become meta. Like, it was cool that they were able to produce something that is self-sustaining, like you said. It does have a decent chunk of requirements, which is just like get a piece of Barrows tank armor or something, and then preferably have 70 defense, which is a pretty beefy requirement as well, kind of in that mid game. And then, you actually have gear that's reasonable to obtain, which I love the drop rates of. I love the dry mechanic, the anti-dry mechanic that they have. And then it's just really freaking good gear. And it's actually what's shocking, and I think this is why I say it's almost like too overtuned, but probably at a good level, is just the fact that as soon as you get all the moon stuff, I mean, that is a tribrid setup. You can go to raids right after, basically.
Yeah, I had a interesting conversation with my group Iron Man partner, who, if people watch my videos, you probably have seen him in the background all the time. He was kind of asking me like, "Hey, do you think that the Blood Moon set, for example, is overpowered? Because it is as good as a torso. It essentially has devalued the torso in many ways.
Hmm.
Even though I guess you could say that you need a higher, point of accessibility for that. And it's also devalued Bandos in some ways because it gives the exact same strength bonus as well. It's a very interesting item. I would say yes and no. The reason I think why these pieces can be seen as overpowered is, I mean, not to get too into the nitty gritty of game design already or the RuneScape's backend already, but it's because of the way RuneScape has its breakpoints of like damage scaling and all that kind of stuff. Like +4 strength is one, +1 max hit essentially, and unfortunately, what that creates is a really difficult like needle to thread where if they're creating gear that gives +1 strength bonus, it's completely and utterly useless as quote unquote power armor. But on the other hand, if they give it a +4 strength bonus, it's already competing with Bandos. You know, I think the how narrow that margin is, creating itemization in old school is so difficult as a result of that. That's a whole different topic. I actually just had a conversation with Mod Arcane about that. Like, it's so interesting that creating a mid-game piece is so challenging because it threatens to kind of step on the feet of Bandos almost just by proxy of it having a strength bonus.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think the one thing that makes it reasonably balanced is just the cost associated with the armor.
Yeah,
Um,
very
you know,
expensive
it
repairs.
yeah, it doesn't seem like it's I don't know, I feel like it's pretty generous with how much time you get to use it, but that alone I think was the key to making moons like perfect was just okay, like as long as this has some sort of cost associated to it. If there was absolutely zero costs to it, then I think it would actually be overpowered at that point.
I
Yeah.
like you even touch on what makes Perilous Moon so cool too is the fact that you need tank gear to even do it. Like you don't need it, but it's recommended. You
Yep.
heavily benefit from having it if you're an early to mid game account. And that's so intelligent because it is a spiritual sequel to Barrows, right? It's three bosses, they each drop their own armor set. It's very much underground, all that kind of vibe. And but unlike Barrows, right, it's first of all a bit less, in my opinion, a bit less boring and a bit less annoying with a prayer drain before you get the combat achievements and all that. But also, it synergizes with Barrows. It really benefits from Barrows existing and having the Barrows gear that you're now leveraging to get power gear. Um, I love that. That's such an intelligent design decision in like what that narrow space that I defined as before. They kind of nailed it. I really like the inclusion of Perilous Moons, and I really love the grind for it too.
So what are your thoughts on Barrows in general? Do you think Barrows has been sort of devalued? I mean, I know you kind of are incentivized to get at least a Barrows piece before going to Moons. But what are your thoughts on Barrows now? I know there are still a couple requirements. One, like if you want to get the Mauritania Diary, you do have to complete a Barrows set. But do you see Barrows having been sort of devalued in any way? And is that even something we should think about?
I mean, my perspective on Barrows is that old man, they've been alive for long enough. They've been around for 20 years. The fact that they've remained relevant for 20 years is just unbelievable to me for a piece of for just some armor. And that's awesome, by the way. I'm not saying that as a
Yeah.
bad thing. I love that. That's so cool, and that's kind of like demonstrative of old school RuneScape. Something I took notice of early in old school RuneScape is that the way they quote unquote devalue gear in the best way, in the ideal situation, is that they just pivoted down, right? Back then, Barrows might be the end game gear, but now it's the early game gear. And all that happens with gear is that it just kind of goes down in your character's progression, which is super cool. So I love the position that Barrows is in right now. It's like your first real set that you're getting, and that's really satisfying. But yeah, you don't need to spend 400 chests in Barrows, which is good. I think that the ideal for Barrows is 100 to 150. I don't think I don't wish green logging Barrows on my worst enemy, because it is very monotonous content. It is kind of old and kind of janky. Doesn't have that many mechanics to really perfect or engage with. So it just existing and you'd have to do it a little bit is good enough for 20-year-old content, in my opinion.
And what do you think of? So there's obviously so many great updates with mid game. Do you feel like there are any pitfalls that are still there that will get players to leave the game because it is just such a daunting thing? I feel like one thing that's coming to mind, just me asking this, is just agility at the early levels. For some
Yeah.
reason, I I almost start getting knots in my stomach watching somebody that hasn't ever played the game doing rooftop agility for the first time and
Yeah.
just recognizing how agonizing it can truly be just to get to a reasonable agility level where you're trying to grind for graceful potentially, or even just get to like level 60. I feel like that is one of those things that's like make or break for a lot of players. It can just be so agonizing. I wonder, is there anything else on your mind, or even if you want to touch on the agility, how they could maybe improve those sort of aspects for mid game?
Yeah, definitely. You touch on agility, and I think what you touch on too is just a broader issue right now with old school that I I think it's a hot take to even talk about this, but also like it needs to be talked about, and I think people kind of have to bounce out of that mentality that just because it's old, it doesn't, shouldn't be changed. There's old stuff about old school RuneScape that works beautifully, as we talked about with Barrows, but there's also old stuff that really not only doesn't hasn't aged well, but it just has fallen out of relevancy. And so many skills in the game, in the early and mid game especially, have just kind of fallen out of relevancy. And you see this right now with new players. They join the game and they think intuitively, right? They think about the game intuitively, which is how you should think about the game. A game should feel intuitive. And they're like, oh, I'm going to mine and smith my armor. But you're really not going to do that because mining and smithing is completely irrelevant outside of like two or three things that make it relevant. Sandstone, for example, amethyst if you're an ironman, very late, much later on, or like Giant's Foundry slash Blast Furnace, right? Like you're really rarely utilizing those skills at their core functionality. And the reason I bring that up is because agility is a great example of that too, where conceptually it might be kind of interesting, but in practice, it has really fallen out of favor as a concept. So to me, agility needs to inhabit a more like fluid training like paradigm. That sounds really vague, but like I have a whole agility rework master doc I'm pulling from that I like made like 6 months ago because I was bored at 3 in the morning. And in my opinion, agility, we're not even on sailing yet, but agility should inhabit a same space that sailing does, where the way a really core method of training it should just be actively doing things with it, rather than just clicking on green squares or whatever. Hollow Sepulchre is a great example of them harnessing that at a high skill level, but just I wish there was a way to do agility that didn't feel like you're watching animations half the time. And I think engaging skilling is is the next big evolution for old school RuneScape. I know that's an evil word to use, but like that it really is. That's why I'm really preying on sailing success here, is because I want Jagex to establish themselves as capable of a new skill and capable of reworking skills if they need, just to change certain core functionalities that have fallen out of favor. Sorry for the long answer.
No, these are perfect. I know my audience will appreciate it. First of all, they appreciate just the fact that you do think about these things. I feel like having a guest on like you that really will wake up at 3 in the morning and start jotting ideas down about how you think about the game is exactly perfect. But I am I'm in total alignment with you where it comes to like the evolution of skilling. That's the absolute worst thing to call it, to brand it at least.
Yes,
But
yes, don't call it that.
yeah, yeah. But
I,
I'm on board with just the fact that there's so much potential for skilling even in the early days, and it doesn't need to be crazy. I've talked ad nauseum about agility, really focusing in on rhythm, having just even like a simple click box course that engages with rhythm. I mean, if you wanted to
yeah,
click, the next obstacle, you have to do it in a certain rhythmic pattern. And I feel like even that will get people to start feeling the tick system a little bit earlier on in their game experience, and it'll just be something more interactive. And beyond that, I mean, we see rune crafting. I know, I guess
yeah.
Guardians of the Rift is just what everybody just jumps into, but it really does feel like rune crafting even could have a bit of a look when it comes to balancing, making it so crafting your runes genuinely can make sense at an early stage. It feels like that's just something nobody's ever doing. Just go to Guardians of the Rift
Yeah.
and basically just camp there till 99 or
Yeah,
do
I
Zaya.
think not to cut you off there. I think runecrafting, like top down, just needs a complete change in the way you do it. You can't be slowly with 10 agility or 20 agility from your Draenor courses, walking to an altar with 28 essence in your bags, or I guess 27 if you have the talisman, clicking on it and making 18 mind runes. Like it can't be that way. It just no one's gonna do it, and no one does do it. As you said, people jump into Guardians of the Rift because Guardians of the Rift is cool. It's cool to be around hundreds of players. It's cool to be around a method that actually asks you to consider something beyond just clicking on the next area to walk. It's cool to be doing something a bit more actively and being actively rewarded for doing that. The pull system is really great in that way. I think I would just prefer Jagex to just reconsider Runecraft as like a core function. Like, what does it provide people? Because right now, the better method to get runes is obviously not doing it, is just buying them mostly, right?
Yep.
With some of the gold you earn. And if we want a skill that's all about making runes and we give them, this buyable power from just shops, it just immediately gets disincentivized. And the best RuneScape stuff is the stuff when skills interconnect with the rest of the game. That's like what makes RuneScape so fun, is that different skills benefit each other and as a result benefit you. So I would love to see that with Runecraft. As much as I like, by the way, the mini game stuff that they do, that's probably the most like palatable way to change stuff. I think people are very averse to reworking anything in old school, but like a mini game essentially does do that, right? Like if we are to make Runecraft, it would, or rework Runecraft, it would probably be more similar to Guardians of the Rift than it is to the way it is now, in some ways. So like that's the more palatable way to like, oh yeah, we do want to change stuff. We do want to make a new method of training. But it also doesn't feel great, I'm sorry, that like the majority of a skill is literally confined to an instanced minigame. That also doesn't feel
Yeah.
great. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even just the runes balancing of Runecraft could just be a game changer. I mean, if you could go and craft a decent amount, I mean, not even decent, but like an actual significant amount of those elemental runes at the early stage, I feel like that would be just just something that actually makes sense. I mean, like, for example, when you start off on a new Iron Man, there is that kind of incentive to go get a bunch of mind runes, potentially to start like hitting, your strike spells on things to train up your magic. Imagine you could actually just go do a few laps of going to the mind altar with some essence that you can get earlier on. Maybe even have some sort of bank deposit at the essence mine in general, so for the early game, so you don't have to do the classic 2005 method of running back to the bank and back to just bank 28 essence at a time, but something where you can just bank them quite easily and then go to the mind altar, and instead of just crafting 28 mind runes, you're crafting like 560 or something that's like actually reasonable at that stage, because it really does feel like at the later levels you start getting multiple runes and it actually starts feeling good, but at that point you're just doing way other method. There's so many different methods at that point, and there's no real reason to be trying to craft a bunch of mind runes at that stage in the game. So I feel like some sort of rebalancing where those early sort of like elemental and body and mind runes can be obtained at a very rapid rate, even at that early stage. I think something like that would even be appropriate to start incentivizing people. And I don't know, there's a lot that I think of when it comes to those, like agility. I feel like even smithing and mining, the thing is with smithing and mining at the early stage is there's just quests that you can bypass the first 30 levels like pretty easily.
Yeah.
And I do
That
wonder.
and just the output of those skills isn't ideal, right? Like you're not gonna get 80 smithing to make an adamant set. You're just gonna,
Yeah. Yeah.
never do that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some issues with mining and smithing. I feel like smithing in general, it feels like you just get to Giant's Foundry and just camp there forever. Maybe do some blast furnace to get the ores, but I feel like the over balancing, I feel like they way overtuned the amount of XP per bar you get at Giant's Foundry, which has basically completely eliminated the incentive to do classic anvil smithing. And I feel like they could maybe look at the numbers when it comes to just that sort of like classic smithing at the early stage. But
Yeah, I almost wish that maybe they integrated like there was a multiplier based on the items that you actually have. Like instead of just bars being the currency essentially of Giant's Foundry and everything being scaled to them, I almost wish that like a plate body was worth much more than 5 bars, which would kind of incentivize you to make a plate body first and then bring it to Giants Foundry to give you more of a cycle of smithing rather than just getting bars from one mini game and then bringing it to another mini game, which is again just feels kind of strange to me as like a element of the world, just like thematically, I guess. And I also feel like a lot of skills just need to be rebalanced from like a level standpoint. That's maybe also a controversial take, but like on Runecraft, I mean, smithing is a really complicated one because we don't want to put rune at 50 smithing because of the alching issues. But when it comes to like Runecraft, why is the Wrath rune like what 95
Yeah,
rune crafting to
ridiculous.
create? Yeah, no one's ever doing that, right? And the big issue there is that it doesn't drop from like any enemy apart from like some dragons and Yama now. It's just bizarre. It's such a weird place because it unlocks the best elemental spells, but the best elemental spells are kind of shitty too. So it's just kind of like no one's doing anything there apart from that one prayer method. I wish they would kind of address that and figure out a way to integrate wrath runes in a more interesting way. I would support something that just involves you making them in a different method rather than just traditional runecraft. But regardless, I just that's something I wish they would look at too. And I know again, maybe people are kind of precious about this stuff, but just considering like, hey, if for the first 75 levels the entire skill is meaningless, maybe it's we can consider how to just slightly change things to make it more engaging. Slayer is another example of that. Because Slayer is awful until you get gargoyles, essentially. So I wish people would, be more open to stuff like that.
On the topic of wrath runes, I mean, just one of the simplest changes they could do. I mean, one, it's locked behind DS2. So
Yep.
in order to even craft them in the first place, it's a pretty hefty requirement to just get that quest done. And what they could do is just simply have a version of the Wrath Altar that's like you can go there and try to craft before 95, but you just won't get as many because you'll be failing it potentially. But you'll have maybe
Yeah.
mild success, something like kind of like combination runes, where if you don't have like a binding necklace, you just kind of break half of them. It could be something as simple as that, where if you just don't have that requirement, you're probably only going to be getting about 25% of the runes or something like that. And some version of that would even be okay, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, honestly, like any small changes like that, just in like quality of life, could give at least a little bit of incentive to pursue something that you otherwise would never do just because it's not balanced around you doing it. Like I just don't know anyone who's ever grinding 95, for Wrath runes unless they're doing some very specific niche like prayer training method.
Yeah.
Rather, you know what I mean? So it's a very, very, very specific thing there. Um, and I do support, mini games being added to fix certain issues with skills. I support small quality of life things being added, even when I think the greater issue is more holistic. That greater issue is also more dev time. It requires more player, engagement. It requires a ton of acceptance from players that it might not be perfect on launch. It's just a very complicated conversation to have in a living ecosystem. And so I don't fault Jagex for pursuing like the quote unquote band-aid for now.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of band-aids, I mean, there's so much I want to get into. You mentioned Slayer, obviously, with the whole summer sweep up. I do want to touch on that.
Sure.
But I will say, I mean, it does feel like some of the time those band-aid fixes end up being a detriment. I mean, Scar Essence Mine, I know this is a 2-year-old thing,
Yeah.
topic to rehash, but it really felt like we had a great opportunity to just spend a few more months coming up with genuine rebalancing to rune crafting to make it so rune crafting actually gives you an appropriate amount of runes. I feel like it's so simple to just see like we're just not getting enough runes from traditional rune crafting, so just up it. Yeah, like it doesn't ultimately matter if I don't know. I just feel like there was like some fear about like rune crafting can't be too profitable. I just find that so silly. Like, why can't it? Why can't we just rebalance how many runes you get to, and this is just like an open conversation of like how many blood runes should you be able to get per hour? How many death runes should you be able to get per hour? Like things like that, where it really just, we never had the conversation. And then, so instead of ever talking about it and actually just rebalancing the numbers, we just went straight to like, here, you just go craft bloods for 1 hour and get 400,000 of them, like just with your money. It's very sad in a way, because it feels like these days, if you were to try to rebalance rune crafting, it won't ever be as meaningful as it could have been, because we just do have shops, we do have Scar Essence, and I don't know. It's just kind of like, I worry sometimes about those band-aid fixes, but again, I do understand it. I've talked to devs that were like, I think Mod Goblin was one of the names I was talking with, and he was like, you know what, like it makes perfect sense to kind of rebalance and readdress runecrafting as a whole, but we just don't have the time for it. We don't have the resources. I mean, they do have the resources, but they're just focused on so many other things that a simple band-aid they just thought was like the better move.
Which is why I'm like once again hoping for sailing to kind of nail it. And of course, it's never going to appeal to everyone or be great for everyone because there's just a group of people that, and there's valid criticisms for sailing, of course, but there's also groups of people that are just very spiteful toward the existence of it or just the existence of a new skill in general, whether it's because they're maxed or because they're very precious about old school RuneScape and its max total level number or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, I'm really hoping the Jagex, for the majority of players, kind of knocks it out of the park with sailing, because that is the trajectory for old school RuneScape's evolution, and it has been since 2013. From everything that I've seen, is Jagex gets a lot of doubt on them, both reasonable and unreasonable, that they can't do something. They end up doing it well, and people are much more amicable to them doing something like that again. Raids is an example of that, for example, right? Like we have never seen anything like raids. I say we, I wasn't around during the release of Cox, but we before raids, there was nothing like raids, right? There was no insular, instanced, rogue-like-esque thing that had like 12 incredibly powerful uniques in it. Like it was just such a unique element of the game with a unique way to engage with it that really incentivized bringing groups, at least initially. So it's Jagex had to prove themselves to make it happen. They made it happen. And now people are more amicable to them exploring their options with PVM. I'm hoping the same applies to sailing because, and again, I'm a new player, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt here, but I can't imagine having a RuneScape without new skills. That just doesn't, that's always been a core identity of RuneScape, is adding new skills and expanding the internet connectivity of the game. It doesn't make sense to me that RuneScape was adding new skills from 2001, from Classic, to 2007, and then the 2007 version of the game was like, actually, we're never going to do that again. It's like, why not? That's kind of that's part of what makes the game so great. It's skills, quests, and combat, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do wonder what the pie chart kind of looks like, or maybe the Venn diagram of people that are actually fully anti new skill versus people that just really didn't want sailing and were in favor of something like shamanism, which on a personal note, shamanism would have been a devastating update to the game. I think that would have been way too much to start adding like power imbues and auras and random upgrades to every piece of armor. That would have been a nightmare. And I think, just to make it very clear, I mean, this was even before we were talking about Ruinous Powers. Ruinous Powers got scrapped because it really was just overly complicated. It felt like in order to change a full prayer book, you had to just basically keep the same stuff that became meta, like redemption and things like that, and add it onto the new prayer book, because we just had so many metas revolved around the standard prayer book. And Ruinous Powers, in theory, before we had started really testing it, was just so cool. It was such a cool idea, and I feel like the same could be said about shamanism. I think just the fantasy of shamanism in your head is like, this is awesome, and then you actually start seeing the nitty gritty of like how much this would change over all of combat, and even just the idea of you rolling up to Tob with the boys, and then all of a sudden, like, you don't have your auras, you don't have your aura 3 power attachment to this piece of armor. You're trolling, basically, like you're a clown because you don't have all these auras and stuff. I just feel like that would have been a nightmare for the game, and I feel like the same can be said at a more mild note with sailing. Like, my fantasy of sailing, when I would think about it, 4.5 years ago, when I was talking with BC Guppy on the cast about like how sailing could just be like the greatest thing that ever came into this game, it was so easy for me to see all the potential good from it and not see how just like difficult it is to make a successful sailing update that appeals to all players. And I feel like these days I'm pretty indifferent to sailing. I'm excited for it ultimately, but I feel like I am a lot more like grounded in like, okay, this is actually just going to be a skill. There will be boring parts of it, and ultimately it will just be kind of a grind to 99, which is a little upsetting for me. But I want to kind of hear your take, because you only have been playing for a year and a half actively. Are you like really looking forward to sailing? And if so, like, what are the aspects of sailing that really speak to you?
Great. I love my sailing spiel. I've been talking about it in the shower all the time. So I am looking forward to sailing, and I want to preempt what I'm saying here by saying like it is a skill, so it's going to be monotonous at points, at many points probably, and that's fine, right? I can't name a single skill in the game that is not monotonous after enough time. Even really cool methods like Hollowed Sepulchre to me get really monotonous after the 300th, 3000th, lap. So that is just an inherent element of doing something over and over and over again. But sailing is really interesting. The main criticism, I will start with the criticism I have of sailing, is that it's like the third skill they would add to the game or should have added to the game because sailing is in scope so much larger than other skills could be. And they have yet to prove that they're able to do something simpler. So they're jumping into the most complex possible thing. And as a result of that, they have to sand down and grind down what sailing should be, which is even more crazy than what it is now. That's my hot take. I think sailing needs to be way crazier than what it is now. But because people are so scared of what a new skill could mean for the game, Jagex is like defaulting to making it no, it's going to be you click on a sail every 16 seconds and then you're going to, get some sailing XP. It's like, no, like it could be way cooler than that. But I know why you have to do it like that because for the people that just want woodcutting or that's what they might expect, you kind of have to give them some of that. So that's my main criticism of sailing is that I maybe it should have happened later in the game's timeline, but as a concept I love it. So here's three steps, three stages, I think three of why I love it. First is the output. An output of a skill is almost always more interesting or should be than the input. That's how you make an incentive to do the skill. Doing Giant's Foundry gets really boring, but you like the gold, right? That's kind of what Giant's Foundry gives you. But in a more interesting sense, doing sailing is really boring in my opinion, but the output is huge. Getting those huge PVM upgrades is really satisfying in Slayer. So the output has always been an incentive. Same with construction. It's like my favorite output of any skill. I love all the utility a house gives you. Sailing is like that, but like times five, where the output now is not just a singular increase to your utility, it's like a worldwide increase to your utility. It opens up so many elements of the game in a unique way. It's kind of like it synergizes so much with the game in a way that, in my opinion, a great skill should. And the second thing I want to bring up with sailing, and I'm sorry for yapping here, is that it also allows Jagex to piggyback off the things that they've learned by updating pre-existing outdated skills. When people complain, or maybe rightfully, or whatever you might think, say that sailing feels like a minigame, I can't help but think, good. Yes, that's how most people train skills now. They do Wintertod, they do Guardians of the Rift, they do Giant's Foundry. They don't mine adamant ore. And it should feel like you're engaging with something, and that might feel like a mini game to you. But it's also so much more expensive than every mini game in the game. A mini game is usually small, it's instanced, it's very, very like in one room or two rooms. But here we have a skill that's the entire uninstanced open world that's just gotten bigger, and you can exit and do it whenever you want at any point, really. That's really cool. And they're using all that design methodology to kind of create something. They're using it to create a skill that doesn't require post hoc band-aids to fix. Not as much. And that's exciting. You have 6 different or 5 different training methods that can all be balanced with Jagex's current understanding of the game, rather than them needing to consider something made in 2003 or 2004. So that's kind of the quick spiel, or maybe a long spiel about sailing and why I'm excited for it. Although with all that said, there are criticisms. You can't. I'm not trying to pretend that it's the perfect thing. I think that like I don't look forward to the parts where I'm incredibly bored with doing something. The things that really incentivize me to continue doing something really boring in Old School is the output. That's kind of the benefit of designing a game like Old School, is that you can get players to kind of sit in this lull, this boring kind of environment, but they're so excited for what the return is. And the value of that return is determined by how much of that, like, how much you've overcome essentially. I always say that, being really good at tick manipulating and being really, really good at like PVM, or being in Counter-Strike, being really good at clicking heads, that's a skill, but patience is a skill as well. And Old School RuneScape really values that skill too. So while I'm not excited about sitting there getting 93 sailing, to unlock something, in a standard method, what I am excited for is what that unlock is. And the better that unlock, the more excited I am for it, and the more excited I am for that skill itself. So that's kind of like the positive and negative there, where the reason I hate Slayer for the first 75 levels is because there is nothing to gain from it. It is so boring to just only look forward to the next level because, eventually you'll get something from it, maybe. But at 75 Slayer, at 85 Slayer, you're fighting a monster. I want the Abyssal Whip. And that's what, makes something like the grind feel worthwhile. So sailing really, I think, adds to that in spades without actually increasing player power, which is another genius element. And I think Jagex talked about that, where they don't need to make your number higher. They have this whole, insular horizontal progression system applied to sailing, and giving reason for all these new ores and trees to exist without just making a better bow.
Mm. I think one of the interesting things about sailing, I think, well, actually, something that kind of made me a little bit more excited about it was those duo training methods that they were kind of showing off. We won't have the Slayer plus sailing thing quite yet on launch. That'll be coming shortly after, but they will have like mining and sailing and fishing and sailing, kind of like these combo skills going on. And I think that'll be really interesting. But yeah, it feels like one of the, I guess, disappointing things about sailing is them, like you said, being too careful about them, like not really changing the meta. I mean, sailing really could have been a class of its own where they could have just really focused on just fun and not traditional skilling. But I do understand where they're coming from. They have to appeal to a large cohort of players that, like, one, that are more purist, more want that feel of old school. I just feel like sailing as a sort of exploration skill had so much more to offer than just sitting at a little like spot and just AFK, sitting there digging up stuff from the sea. I don't know. Just it's a little concerning to me. I think they really could have focused more on the adventure side of it. But
Is
yeah,
that the sailing is such a broad concept that they can add things like that to the skill itself without ever feeling like they need to like justify it, right? Like if they can
true.
add a really cool adventure element to the skill, and I really hope that, and I know almost for a fact that they're going to do this, but like there's going to be so much opportunity in the first like 3 or 4 weeks of sailing to have tons, dozens of unique mysteries and unlocks, to find. Uh, so those first 3, 4 weeks are gonna be really fun. But how do we extend that to years and years down the line now that it's a permanent fixture of the game? And my hope is that Jagex is also considering that. Like, yeah, we have the woodcutting of sailing. We have digging up the salvage. Yeah, we have the, I don't know, Slayer Hunter contracts of sailing where you're delivering one thing to another thing. But now, how do we make it something different too? Not just an output, but like in action. We have the Hollowed Sepulchre of sailing, right? With the little Barracuda trials. But like, what if it was something more too? That's what I really want them to do, because that's where there's potential for the evil word evolution of the concept of what a skill in old school RuneScape feels like. It doesn't need to feel like a chore if there's enough diversity in what you do with it, I guess.
Mm. And what are your thoughts on XP per hour for sailing? I feel like this is something that devs have been very clear on, that they're not trying to heavily focus on the numbers at this point. They're just trying to get the skill to feel good. But do you have a range in your head of what you would think would be optimal for XP per hour at like level 50, say, level 70, and then maybe level 99?
In my opinion, I think there's two scaling kind of systems with XP per hour that determine it, right? You have construction, which you can hit 1 million per hour if you're investing millions upon millions upon millions of GP into it. Side note, I love construction just for what it gives you. But on the other hand, you have skills that don't give them anything, and as a result, they're super, super slow because they only give you output. Um, I think sailing can operate in between, and the nice thing about developing a new skill is you can actually have it do both if you want, as to a certain extent. Where, in my opinion, skill expressive methods of training, not just gold expressive, but like skill expressive, should always yield like not disproportionately, but like way higher XP rates. Unironically, one of my criticisms of Hollowed Sepulchre is how minor that increase is over agility proportion or over rooftops in Arty proportionally for how much harder it is to learn than just clicking a green box, every 10 seconds or whatever. I think so. That's my impression of it. Like in my opinion, Hold Sepulchre should be 150k an hour, and even then, it's like it's so much harder than rooftops. And it's just it feels weird to like, oh, it's 10%, 20% better, but you're doing 100 times more. So sailing to me is that. So I'm sorry, to answer your question, I would hope that same things would apply, right? Where a passive method might be like 50k, 60k an hour, but a really active method like the top end Barracuda trials would be pushing like 150, 160, even 200k, to not make the grind from 92 to 99 feel like you're spending 80 hours, bored out of your mind, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's my impression of it. Yeah.
I'm kind of with you. I think it's always a scary thing to say 200 or even 300k XP an hour, but whenever I say that, I'm talking top end, highest efficiency method at 99. So anything below that, because I've always been on the camp of just make the XP rates very, very reasonable and even generous to some extent, where at 99 you are in the range of like 250k to 300k XP an hour if you're going to be full focused and you're already are 99. I think at level 70, something like 160, 170, 180k at a reasonable training, like I guess activity is good. So it's just something that's not like super intensive, but something that's not full AFK. Something along the lines of Hunter. I feel like Hunter, you can almost push up to 300k if you're a really, really sweaty black chin hunter. And then anything before that, you're really in that like mid 100k kind of range. I think that's just like perfect.
Yeah,
Like
I agree with that.
sailing would be good.
I think like things can be pushed too far, I think. But to me, it's always should feel satisfying. There's very simply put, skills should have, pun intended, I guess, a skill expression to them. They just really need to, and some skills have developed that just by proxy of players figuring out all the crazy emergent methods of the game, like 1.5 tick teaks, like like sandstone mining when you're tick manipulating it. I like doing that personally, and all that stuff needs to now be baked into the game. Like we can't exist in a RuneScape where that's not a thing when it's a thing. And don't remove it because that's cool for people to actually express themselves, in unique ways. But simultaneously, the skill should also only be that. So having those different inputs would be really, really cool. And I hope that Jagex is considering, I don't know, I haven't spoken to anyone, working on sailing. I really hope that Jagex considers the level of satisfaction someone can get from getting really good at something after a long time, because that's the entirety of PVM and especially the entirety of PvP,
Yeah, that's something they haven't focused on with skilling, and I've always been just pushing for skill expression in skilling. That just needs to be a thing, and get rid of the masochism, get rid of the things that are unfun. I mean, I want to kind of switch gears slightly and talk about just the summer sweep up. I mean, one of the things, I guess this actually wasn't in the summer sweep up, I don't think, but there was like Abyssal Sire changes. That wasn't summer sweep up. That must have been a little bit before that.
A little bit earlier, yeah.
But something like Abyssal Sire changes. I mean, I just grinded out a bludgeon on my new iron, and that was genuinely an enjoyable experience. And I didn't even have the Scobo to be, one-shotting the vents, but it still was such a pleasant experience being able to just hit more consistently on the vents. You do at least half your damage to it, which is just a positive change. And you don't have to wait and sit around waiting for the Abyssal Sire to move to its next station. You can just start hitting it whenever. Yes, you're only doing half damage, but I do think it's funny because they were sort of talking about that, and I was really against the idea of half damage, but it did make sense the more I look at it. I think because they couldn't make drastic changes. I think if you were to make like a fresh boss, you always should be able to do 100% damage to things. But I think instead of like having a full rework where Abyssal Sire just has like twice the HP, they just went a more like careful route. But something like Abyssal Sire that we've seen, or something like all the Toa changes, which I haven't experienced yet, but I've just heard amazing things about.
Very nice,
it's getting rid of the obnoxiousness, getting rid of the things that genuinely feel unfun, and seeing that as a flaw rather than a feature. I think for so many years in this game, we saw the super, super clunky, annoying mechanics as a feature of like, this is how old school should be. It should be absolutely masochistic. We should hate ourselves. And this is the charm of the game. And I feel like we're at a totally different point in this game where we're like in the quote unquote enlightenment, which I call it, which is just really focusing in, narrowing in on the fun aspect and getting rid of the bullshit. And I think with skilling, we need to go down that route. We need to start introducing fun, because it really does feel like any of the high level methods are super, super masochistic. And so what they do to sort of counteract that and to try to like get the average player involved in skilling is just have the most brain dead, numbing methods of all time. And it's just sad. It's just like, holy crap, this is so boring.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that, well, I want to also say that, like, I think the issues with Toa were very different than the issues with Abyssal Sire, just like from a design philosophy standpoint. Like, Sire came out at a time where I don't think Jagex at that time in 2015, 2016 really knew what PVM could be or should be or could, like, or where PVM would stand in RuneScape, right? Because they were innovative. That they unironically, as much as people hate the word evolution, I'm like pushing for destigmatizing that word within this community, because you can't just let one update from a decade and a half ago define a word. But regardless,
Hey, they did that to themselves,
no, it's true. It's true. It's like a, in some ways it's true, but in other ways, like, also, but people, they were evolving. They did, not even they did evolve PVM to an extreme degree, right? As a new player, I feel like I have at least kind of, interesting insight here, maybe for someone who's played for a long time, where I'm a new player, so I'm coming in without nostalgia really, so I can kind of point out the things that how they feel, like kind of motion to something and say, yeah, you can notice when something is from 2007 in this game, and you can notice when it's Zulrah, because it's very different. And also you can notice when it's Zulrah and when it's post 2019, post TOB stuff. These are enormously different, like in feel. They maybe to someone who's used to all of them, they're not. But for me, who's came in with all of these things already present, TOA cannot be more different than Zulrah, and Zulrah cannot be more different than God Wars Dungeon 1. So Sire came during that transitionary period where they're figuring out, I think, how PVM looks. And I always support a full rework for that, because Sire, I grinded out a bludgeon back when, before the changes, and it was a disaster and annoying, and 500 kills of just whatever the hell that was. But it was what it was. Same with Cerberus, in my opinion. These are just bad encounters to the current standards we have today. At the time, they were very unique. They were iterative on the methods that, existed before, which is like God Wars Dungeon 1 and Barrows. But now we have a different standard we're meeting, and there's issues with that standard too. And that's why I mentioned TOA, where like TOA is very much the quote unquote new standard of PVM. It's super intuitive. Like, you can just look at mechanics. As a World of Warcraft player, I can understand every single thing a boss is doing, like, instantly. It's just awesome how intuitive it is by compared to like Chambers of Xeric. But they're also incredibly sweaty in a very unfun way. Like TOA, you mess up once, you're resetting the entire run. It's a super frustrating, and that's where those changes came in. They kind of alleviated some of the heavy complexity in TOA that just kind of detracted from the flow state fun that Old School RuneScape offers. It's funny, like, I ended up enjoying Chambers of Xeric more than TOA in some ways once I learned both, because as much as I hate the jankiness of Chambers of Xeric, because of how chill it ended up becoming when I was good at it, while TOA never became chill. It was always like, I am, white knuckling my way to success here in like 400 plus runs. So, sorry for that long response there, but I want to see Jagex take a stronger stance on some of that, because I'm sorry, no one likes Calphite Queen. People might want to preserve it.
There's issues with it, but I do agree with most of what you're saying, and sorry to just cut you off there, but I do.
No, please do.
I do feel like there is some charm in classic, just hit the boss and it hits you methods. The problem with KQ is, one, for some, I don't, this is the masochism in the player base. They genuinely felt like it was essential to not be able to use that shortcut before the diary, which is absolutely obnoxious. I mean, on this account, I had to go get the tattered head. I didn't get lucky. I had to do 256 kills of running around that whole fucking maze just to get to KQ. And then when you finally get into the layer, KQ's on the other fucking end of the room. So it's like, what the hell is even this? Can we please just shorten this up? I mean, the shortcut itself should be available at 86 agility. Whenever that is the case, you know, like you don't need a diary to do shortcuts. I think that was so stupid. And on top of that, just make it so when you're in the actual room, KQ is right there. Like, why do we have to tank 3 hits from it that has 100% accuracy? And then you can finally start hitting it. It's just obnoxious. But I do like that classic version of just beating the boss down, because what it does add is some sort of like complexity that's chosen. Like, you get to choose if you want to add a little bit more complexity, and it's simplistic and it's rhythmic. For example, if you have a 5-tick weapon, KQ is attacking every 4, you can do step unders and make it so it attacks you, 20% less. And you can also do ring switches, so you can have your Ultor and then you can switch to your Ring of Suffering, and there's different methods of killing it. You can still ult it if you're a main. But I think what's absolutely essential about KQ, in my opinion, is to make it so that it doesn't have 100% accuracy, because then gear matters a little bit more. You can bring tankier gear. You can choose to I don't know, choose the gear that's actually going to like have an effect on it. I feel like it really is silly that you could be naked and still take the same amount of damage as you have in full Torva. That's very silly. And one last thing I guess I'll just say is, when a boss is that simplistic, when it really is the mechanic is just hitting you, it allows you to focus more in on those micro changes like step unders, ring switches, spellbook swapping, thralls, vengeance. It's like, it just feels more like you can interact with more of your own menus and stuff, and your own like stepping and stuff, rather than something that's fully scripted like we see with Toa, where it's like, this is a scripted fight, you have to do exactly this, and there's really no getting around it.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with that part where I don't think that fully scripting every single old school RuneScape fight is the ideal way to go to. And I think Toa did maybe go too far there. And I always criticize Toa for like every boss feeling like an end boss. And that's kind of like what they try to alleviate a bit more with these changes. But what you outlined with KQ is interesting. I do support retaining charm, and maybe I might have a more of like a progressive mindset in that regard, where I'm like, yeah, there's charm, which is like nostalgia, which is the aesthetics and the the immediate appeal. But the second it starts like feeling like I'm hydraulic pressing my nuts, it's like that's when that's when I feel like there's an issue. And what's interesting about KQ, and I always bring up KQ as an example here, because everyone hates doing it, but they're for retaining it, and that's very old school, that mentality, right? So I'm okay with that, and I actually like the examples you gave. But out of curiosity, did you end up doing the oh no, you don't. I remember you saying you don't play leagues, right?
No, but I did see some echo versions of like DKs, for example, KBD.
Yeah.
I think KQ I saw a little bit of.
KQ was one of the echo bosses, and let me just say, the echo KQ, I'm like the biggest stan of the echo KQ, because was such a good fight that came out of just absolutely nowhere. Like, it literally, I mean, the original KQ, as it's just, you kind of hit it and hits it. Maybe you can have some like, step unders and stuff. It was such a unique, interesting, and fun fight that actually echoed, no pun intended, the original fight too, where there were step under mechanics integrated into the fight itself, where you have to step into it to avoid a mechanic, and you have to like do it very rhythmically. It was such a cool fight, where after leagues happened, I'm like, there just can't be a world where that was a one-off like leagues thing, because I love this fight. It's so good, and it feels so different than other fights in the game. Whoever made that fight, if they're watching this, you cooked. I want to see that in the main game, and maybe we can find a way to keep the old one for people. But like, I love that fight, and that if that fight were in the game, I would advocate for KQ getting a cool unique on the table for mid game players to actually farm, because of course they'd want to do it. But I do also recognize keeping things, as they are, is just like a point of reminiscence. There's obviously there's like a limit to that, and a limit to what I'm saying of changing everything, because that's it. That just in a broader sense, I just want to say that what we're experiencing now is actually my favorite thing about talking about old school RuneScape, where I'm a new player. In that sense, I'm quote unquote progressive. I'm always advocating for something new. And you might, and I feel like you are also maybe leaning, you also advocate for change, but generally speaking, older players can be a bit more conservative within the RuneScape sense, and they advocate for keeping more things the same. And the truth there is somewhere in between, right? Like the
Hmm.
push and pull, the real greatness of old school RuneScape is finding that in between of being able to harness what exists and push things forward simultaneously. And that's kind of the conversation we're having about KQ here, where I might advocate for completely change it. It was perfect with the Echo version. It was awesome. And you might be saying, well, there's some value to remembering where it all began, and also having some chill flow state, engagement with just being able to engage with the combat as it once was too.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I've definitely leaned more progressive in a lot of my views. I think a lot of it, I never was a full purist. There's genuinely people that just want the game to be exactly how it used to be with no changes.
And it would be dead if that was the case. I just want to
Oh
say
yeah,
it would be dead.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, that's not even debatable, but I'm always looking for things that just feel better. It's about feel. It's about like how can this boss end up feeling better and still retain the prestige of it potentially, or retain just the value of time you've put into it. I mean, I'm against devaluation for just devaluation's sake. I mean, I do want things to make sense, but I do look at the game, 5 years from now. So like that's another topic we can kind of touch on, is like drop rates in general. I mean, drop rates, I've been very progressive on. I just feel like we need to get to a point where drop rates feel like they're valuing your time. And they've done such a good job with that lately. I mean, Yama is a great addition. I think Yama pre nerfing the drop rates was like perfect. But the problem is you had things like Nex that were absolutely out of control already on release. And so they have to balance it with these absolutely like unrealistic drop rates. And I know that obviously that's subjective. Some people find it totally fine to grind something for 300 hours to get something on rate. I think like it's easy to be on board with that when you've never experienced true dryness. I think once you've experienced going 5x rate of something incredibly rare, you start to kind of feel it of like, okay, this is a serious problem that needs to get addressed. And I think when people just see it as, oh, you can get lucky or you could go drop rate on something. Okay, this amount of hours is fine. But you have to remember that there are those unlucky bastards that go 8x the rate of something. And something like a T-bow, and I harp on this so much, is just, it's completely unrealistic to have something that rare. To have something that efficiently for people soloing takes 300 hours to get. I mean, that's just ridiculous to have to I don't know, to have that. And people that are more in like a sort of just entering late game to try to go for a mega rare at Chambers is so stupid. I mean, it's out of control. And they did that because it was the first raid. They wanted something that has just so much replayability to it. And nowadays we have just endless amounts of PVM content where you don't need to go to the utter extremes to get an upgrade to your arsenal. I'm totally down with pets being rare. I'm down with cosmetics being rare. But when it comes to upgrades to your arsenal, that needs to be more and more reasonable as time goes on, because in 5-10 years from now, this is always the kind of example I bring, is just like, look at the future of it. Is raids 1 until the end of time always going to take, 500 hours for a somewhat newbier guy to go for a T-bow? Like, that's out of control. It's out of control.
Yeah. I think there's two really interesting points here, and the second one we can save for like the following conversation. But when it comes to drop rates, I think in my very first video I talked a little bit about like, I always say this word, input versus output. Like, how much is the game demanding of your time, and then you do like an internal calculus and then determine whether that uh, what the game is asking is worth engaging in. You look at how long it's asking, how much time you have to invest, and what the output is. And for a mega rare, I agree with you that T-bow is too rare. But for a mega rare, it's also like that is the best item in the game, so people might immediately say it's worth it, even if it's super long. Then you might consider, well, how much time do I have to play? Well, it's 2 hours, 3 hours a day. Okay, maybe that's reasonable. If it's 10 hours a day, it's probably reasonable for some players. It's really determined by that kind of like internal calculation that people are doing. Um, there's definitely examples where it's completely failed. Just like not even just people do Cox for a lot of reasons, whether it be Tebow or just the other loot. There could be a counter argument saying, well, it's actually good because people do it. And ultimately, that's kind of my perspective too. Although I fully support a complete Cox loot table change. Um, Regardless, uh, Fasani's Nightmare, I know you talked about it. I talked about it a lot too. That's a perfect example of it, just a cataclysmic failure because no one does this fight except maybe bots. Um, and it took such a long time to figure out how to balance this fight to make it worth doing. And even then, it's still one of the longest grinds in the game, right? Even now, after they removed, they reduced the rates by 2x, or I guess increased the rates by 2x, they removed an entire phase from the fight. And even then, it's like 50 hours, 60, 70, 80 hours longer than Yama is. And Yama gives better armor. That's more relevant. And
Yep.
it's easier fight. And the run back's easier. Like what? And the commons are easier. I'm sorry. What are we talking about here? Why? What's the point? I'm not saying everything needs to be homogenized in regard to how long it takes. There can be niche items, but like there is an extreme here, and clearly people have done that internal calculus and determined this armor set and these three almost completely irrelevant staves that are super expensive are truly never worth going for, especially not as an Iron Man. And as a main, it's like the last thing you buy if you want to push CAs. But even those have been completely rendered mute. Like you don't need Inquisitor for any CAs because you have the Horn now. So you don't need that accuracy on the Warhammer. You can just Horn for it if you have more than one person with you. Or one person with you. But like, so that's kind of my perspective there. It really is that like given that push and pull between what the developer's asking, what the game's asking, and what the player's willing to input. Um, for Chambers as Eric, yeah, that's I think like 4 or 5 uniques should be just taken off that table. I don't see a point in them. It would make it more in line with other raids, but also like that alone would make it a more tolerable experience for its loot. Obviously, the prayer scrolls are an issue for a lot of people. Obviously, like things like getting a Dins is never satisfying. Obviously, getting a Dragon Hunter crossbow is cool initially, but really from the raid, okay. That's always just the worthwhile conversation. But I think a lot of people are very, very anxious about potentially changing things that they've become so used to and so accustomed to. And some of that jank is very appealing, in some ways, and I can empathize with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is. I mean, I think when I suggest something, I mean, I've literally stated that I would be okay with a full on 2 times more common purple chance at Chambers. I mean, just straight up, if they were to change nothing else, just make everything 2 times more common. They could even make it slightly, I guess, less than that, but by sort of rebalancing how the scrolls work, for example, like making it so maybe the scrolls stay the same rate, but everything else gets a slight, like almost 2 times more common, but not quite because the scrolls will have not received that. Something along those lines, sort of just like basically 2x, because and this is the fear of a lot of people, I think, is like if they did that to the game, everything, like the economy would crash, everything would go to shit. And I just don't see that happening. I mean, I really do feel like the way they have the GE sinking big items. I mean, Tebow's one of the things that gets sunk, I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other Chambers things get sunk. And that's just, market manipulation in a sort of way where the devs just have control of like just sinking items that they want that to retain value. But on top of that, first of all, I think Chambers would just be much more fun to do in a way. And the supply and demand of items would just work out eventually over the next 6 months to a year where like, okay, like, yeah, maybe some prices will dip a little bit, but still going for a Tebow that's twice as common is you're still looking at a 200-hour grind for things like, which is absolutely insane. And, I don't know. I just feel like,
am I
yeah,
wrong
go.
in and maybe I could just be completely wrong here with the way drop rates work, but by removing certain items off the table, wouldn't that just by proxy increase the chance of getting another item, or is it calculated differently? I really don't know that.
Well, I mean, they would just decide. I mean, if you wanted the purple rate to stay the same and then you're removing items, then yeah, it would just obviously like the rarity of some things would actually decrease in a way. Like, but if you were to just say, oh, we're going to remove the items, but everything still has its same rate, then yeah, like purples would just get rarer and rarer. So it just depends
Okay,
on how they
so
would do it.
essentially what I would support is like this is like the ideal for me would be like removing some of the maybe unthematic, maybe some of them, most of them are thematic, but like some of the unthematic purples from Chambers of Xeric,
Hmm.
and redistributing some of them to different, you know, activities, different bosses. Things like the Dragon Claws are completely unthematic. They just it's to me, from what I understand about the Dragon Claws, it's like that was a cool item in PvP. We're working on an update. Sure, like it just completely is such a bizarre inclusion there. But then we have things like the Dragon Hunter bow, which is kind of shaped after Ulm, like it looks like him, which is kind of cool. But also like it doesn't necessarily like feel like that great of a piece of gear to randomly get, especially with the T-bow just being an abject upgrade over it on the very fight that it belongs to. So, regardless, you know, things like the Dins, I think, even like if we're looking at mega rares, the Kodai is thematic, but it feels objectively worse to get than the other two, because it has such a much more unique and niche use, right? Um, so that would be like my ideal, but just a flat increase could also work just because like yeah, I agree, like it's a bit untenable. I have 300, I think, through Chambers of Xeric, so I'm not dry on T-bow, so I'm not like upset about that I don't have one yet. I'm not particularly, you know, I'm not like expecting it or anything. But yeah, it's definitely pretty insane like having to do 600, 700 clears to even get one roll on it, like from a standard perspective, you know, it's pretty insane.
Yeah. And again, it just comes down to, I mean, because some people are advocating for like anti-dry mechanics for places, and I'm just on board with just make drop rates reasonable in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I don't like anti-dry mechanics. I just like drop. I mean, actually, hold on. Let me think about that for a moment. Would you say the Oathblade shards are an anti-dry mechanic?
they
It
are,
gets
but
yeah.
they do it in a decent way where, um, now to be fair, I've only killed like 9 Yama. I haven't quite gotten to that grind. I mean, I am there at this point, but I'm focusing on other things. But Yama, I think, did it pretty damn well, where
Yeah.
you still get the excitement of getting the actual drop itself. So, I mean, one of the things I was thinking was like, oh, what if it's just oath plate armor piece, and that's the thing you get, and then you can shape it to whatever you want. But then that's not as exciting because then it's just like, I don't know, you
Yeah.
didn't get like the big one or
I
whatever.
do like the Oathblade shards, and I'm biased as well when I
Yeah.
say that because I have 1,000 Yama kills and two horns, and that's the only thing I got
Oh,
from Yama.
Jesus.
Yeah, so I had the traditional, you know, or I had the expected, you know, old SRS preferred experience on Yama, where it's like a 1 in 800 for a piece of gear, I guess. But thankfully, I did it with my group Iron Man, and he got two, I mean, he only got two pieces too, so we both kind of went dry. But the Oathblade shards really, really helped us, you know, figuring it out from there. So thank God, thanks Jagex for allowing us to do that because yeah, we didn't want to do 3,000 kills on Yama, but yeah, I like that. What I don't like when it comes to dry mechanics is just like a guaranteed drop after X amount of time. That always doesn't feel good in my opinion. I'd rather just kind of have it happen maybe thematically or naturally with the fight that you're doing. And I just like the excitement of obviously getting a piece of gear. When it comes to shaping the item though, I had the very same exact idea about Fasanis. Um, Right now, it's in a solid state. I have like 200-ish, 250 kills on Fasanis. I'm just getting the Inquisitor because I like the set, honestly. It's kind of useless right now. But I still kind of I like the way it looks. And so I'm kind of grinding it on the side. And I enjoy the fight. I like doing it. But every time I have a chance of getting a piece of gear, I am praying it's not one of the orbs. These are almost useless. And I would hate seeing one. I only have one piece of gear so far, though, of course. And it's the helmet. But regardless, sorry. I had the idea of combining the orbs into a singular one, and then you can just attune them and create the one you want. Removing two items from the drop table would really help Fasanis feel a little bit more tenable. It doesn't need, what is it, 7 uniques on one single boss is kind of insane. So like I feel like just kind of condensing that a little bit helps. The same would honestly apply to Nex, although I haven't done Nex, so maybe I shouldn't comment on it. But like, my God, it's like every single bis item at the end game comes from a single boss. That's insane.
Yeah, actually, that was one thing I wanted to touch on. I do agree. I mean, Nightmare, just the orbs in general were just, it's so weird because you had like a harmonized orb, which was like best in slot for like a slight little time period before the shadow came out and just annihilated it.
Yep.
And, but I
And the other two
actually,
are like, what? Yeah, sorry.
yeah. No. I mean, the thing is, like, the Eldritch actually does have some decent use, especially with like a light bearer in places. I
It's
mean,
like
you're just
Inferno, right? It's where an Eldritch would see use.
Inferno or DKs or any place that you just really want to sustain prayer. It's actually quite nuts.
I guess my issue though is that like, and
Mhm.
I have this issue, this criticism. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, you
with
go for
the
it.
Inquisitor's armor, where it's like, I might say it's useless, but then someone says, well, it's actually really good on a Raxor, and it's like, yeah, but who's doing Fasanis before a Raxor? You know what I mean? Like, who's doing that? So I guess
Yeah.
that's my main criticism. But again, I'm super Iron Man brained. So anytime a main is like, well, you could just buy it. And I'm like, I guess you could. Yeah. But I feel like the game needs to make sense from a progression standpoint and then the economy. The economy
Yeah.
shouldn't supplement issues with progression. It should just help them, help them feel cooler.
I'm
Sorry.
totally with you. And I actually, I enjoy the listening to the perspective of Iron Man because they do understand kind of more of the progression. Whereas I do still appreciate somebody that plays a main, but I almost feel like they need to play a main, but they also need to have experienced Iron Man to fully understand what's going on. Because when people, like, for example, blood shards, I'm not going to get into this,
Yeah.
but like blood shards is one of those things where it's like all mains will ever see is just the price of it. They'll never see actually grinding it out because
They're
99%
buying it
of
off
mains
bots.
aren't grinding out like blood shards. I mean, it's just usually just alts that are just running it,
Yeah.
or yeah, gold farmers or whatever, not or
Yeah.
whatever else. But when people actually experience obtaining an item like that, they'll be like, "Holy fuck, something needs to change." But most mains are just seeing it as price, and so if you do anything to the rate of it, they'll just be like, "Oh, the price will change." Anyway,
Yeah.
I want to. Yeah,
I'm a
go.
proud owner of zero blood shards. I'm never ever gonna get one. I rather quit the game before doing something like that. It's like it just such a nonsense. That whole thing is just nonsense to me. The blood shards is like a great example of a mechanic to me that's just like so driven by the economy that it forgets like that it's a video game and it's supposed to work like a
Totally.
game.
It's
Um, you
so
know,
bad.
it's awful. It just doesn't make any sense to me. That's why I love Araxor. Beyond just thinking the Noxious Halley is cool and the fight's cool, the existence of the Rancor that kind of allows me to not consider the Blood Amulet of Fury as much.
Hmm.
Um, I'm just like, thank you. I don't ever want to look or think about Vires in my entire life. I'm good with not doing that. So yeah, in one hand, I'm happy about that. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, maybe just kind of figure it out. I maybe hey, if you want to condense the orbs and add a blood shard to Fasani's, that might work. Or just like maybe
Oh,
make
that.
make blood shards something you could create by with crafting and the blood vials you get from TOB. Like I don't know, you can do other options that actually require you to do something that's higher skill than clicking a vire for 25 hours or AFKing a mob. Like to me, the ideal is that when you put in effort in the game should reward you in part in equal to the effort you put in.
Yeah.
I never want the best method to do something is to just click one square the whole time. That's just not, to me, that's not an ideal situation.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can move
No,
on to,
that there's so much. I mean, now I will just touch on it a little bit more, but just even something as simple as, I mean, one of the tasks you can unlock to Slayer is a vampire task. And I've always been against, I know people that listen to my cast have just heard me say this so much, but like I've been against generally 5x more common items through Slayer. I do feel like there are a couple situations where it works, like Revenants is
yeah,
really cool, where you do get that 5x multiplier on weapons, which makes it incentivizes Wilderness Slayer a little bit more. And then that Rev task is just like a treat, like a total treat. I think they could do the same thing with vampire tasks where you could. First of all, I don't feel like the blood shard should even be a 1 in 1500. I think a 1 in 1,000 is more than fine. So just
mhm,
changing that to a 1 in 1,000, I'd be totally cool with. And then if you were to have a vampire task, I really do think like 5x the chance of a blood shard would be fucking awesome. And maybe even
yeah,
like a little Slayer only area where like you do a task, you slaughter it, you basically go rate for a blood shard. So doing a task feels like you're actually getting something, and you're not getting those tasks all the time. So it does feel like a treat to get a vampire task.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. And it's also it's a PV, it's like a really end game, I guess, PVM item, but like
mhm.
just I know we're getting the finale to the Vampire Quest, and they didn't announce any boss coming with that. I'd be surprised if we don't see something with that. But again, that's a perfect opportunity to add something that is just like a cool vampire related boss. The raid that they're adding, raids 4 likely won't be vampire themed. That'd be kind of weird to do 2 vampire themed raids, but
Hmm.
just adding a cool end game boss or even just mid to end game boss that comes from that grandmaster quest they're adding that will just has a 1 in 50, 1 in 100 chance of just rolling a blood shard alongside maybe the 2 or 3 uniques that boss would have, would just alleviate a lot of that. I would feel more happy to do that because my issue isn't competing with bots. It's not the concept of thieving. It's just the kind of action asked from me is not like, it just doesn't feel good to have to be like, oh boy, time to log into RuneScape. Can't wait to AFK for 20 hours. Like that just
Yeah,
doesn't feel
it's
like
horrible.
something I want to do. I'm okay with that with Redwoods. I was really burnt out after League, slight tangent. So I essentially just had my laptop open while I played like other games and did other stuff. While just like AFKing skills, fine, okay. But those outputs, those redwoods, I fletched them into stupid shafts. I didn't get the best in slot amulet from, PVM for it. So that's a very different kind of output from my AFK. I don't want AFK to give me the best in slot amulet. I want something more engaging to provide that. That's my, thing.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I did want to touch on two different things that you brought up earlier, which was guaranteed drops. I do want to just say I do actually like the guaranteed drops when it makes sense. Like one of the things I think is an amazing, but this isn't in the game right now, but I actually do wish it was bottomless bucket being guaranteed at 35. I feel like that can be a very agonizing grind for a new Iron Man to go 4x rate of a bottomless bucket because it is time kept. I mean, it's like you would actually have to wait half a year to get a bucket if you just went 4 times the rate. So I feel like something like that makes sense to be guaranteed at that. So it is anti-dry mechanic. It is a tradable drop because I feel like with untradables, it makes sense. Something like an Abyssal Needle, I feel like should be guaranteed at the drop rate or before if you get lucky. I do like that because it is untradeable. I like the KQ head thing, even though, to be fair, the KQ head didn't even have to have that if you could just use the fucking shortcut before the diary. And then I also like the Vorkath head. I think that's kind of an exciting thing to go for. I think it's better than going, again, 7 times the rate and having to kill 350 Vorkath when you have a fucking rune crossbow and you have to kill it for your backpack. I think
Yeah,
they're,
honestly,
yeah.
I do agree with what you're saying here. Actually, maybe I'll amend my position. For certain very specific elements, like items like those, I'm okay with guaranteed drops. I would be okay with a guaranteed, compost bucket. I got lucky. I got 2 pretty quick, so I was able to give one to my group Ironman partner. But like,
Hmm.
yeah, it would be miserable to do farming without that compost bucket. That bucket is such a huge quality of life. I was always thinking of ways to alleviate that Hespori thing because the real thing about Hespori isn't how rare the bucket is, it's the time gated nature of it that really makes it suck.
Yeah.
The 3-day wait between every kill just for a chance at an item that you want sucks. So I had the idea of like maybe you could like use some of your herb or and tree seeds to expedite the growth on his spore to farm the item, but that might make an unbalanced XP gain from that for mains because you get 16k farming XP for killing him, but maybe you wouldn't get XP from doing that. Point is that I'm okay with whatever solution there is, but because yeah, that's a quality of life item that is locked behind a time gate, which is not ideal. The Vorkath head, I'm also pretty amicable to there being an on drop rate mechanic, but that's mainly because I hate Vorkath. I just don't like the fight. I wonder how much that impacts that. I just don't like a lot of fights where a lot of the damage you take is just unavoidable, kind of like he's RNG jadding you for fucking 55 damage every tick. Like, I don't like that. But even then, I'm okay with those kind of like incremental upgrades in the mid game coming from a guaranteed drop because yeah, I would be miserable doing 500 Vorkath kills with a RCB for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but, in a place like CG, like, yeah, I'm against just guaranteeing items and stuff when it's actually like a PVM encounter. And the thing is, I think CG is one of those places that the rates are fine, kind of. I do wish that instead of the enhanced seed being a 1 in 400 from CG, I wish it was like a 1 in 256. I think that'd actually be just more reasonable across the board. And then for the people that do go 4 times the rate, you're not looking at 1600 CG, you're looking at like 1000 CG. And the people that go incredibly, incredibly dry aren't like just, wanting to, whatever themselves.
Yeah, CG's interesting. I think I did 450 around there for my enhance. And I did not get obviously the blade. But maybe I'll do that eventually. But anyway, the point is that I like CG. The rate is pretty crazy. It's red prison for a reason, but that's mainly because the actual engagement with it is really long. It's like a 10-minute clear for the average player, 9 to 10 minutes, I think, right?
Hmm.
It's pretty long. It's also hard. Fun fact about CG, I would say that's my real come to Jesus moment when it comes to a properly like challenging piece of content. Um, I did not do Fire Cape before CG. That's where I was at in the game and my mentality, FYI. So I was really going in fresh into CG. So it was a real learning curve for me to figure out what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. And that was fun, frustrating, but really fun. And the output is insane. The Alex are crazy at CG. But so yeah, the rates are a bit crazy there. But I'm okay either way. I think my main issue, honestly, with CG is just Jagex seems to really struggle balancing ranged items, and I have no idea why. I just don't like how ubiquitous the Bofa is. I don't like that the Misori. I mean, this just extends to my main criticisms of ranged and magic gear, especially magic gear, as compared to melee stuff. Melee is so diverse and interesting. You got all these unique spec weapons and all this kind of stuff. Ranged, it's kind of like there's some interesting stuff, but usually it's in the end game. You get one spec weapon that you ever use, which is from Nex, like it's very, very like that. And then mage is like you have 3 items. Have fun. That's pretty much the
Yeah.
where I wish they would focus on, because as much as I liked the CG grind looking back on it, and I look back fondly on it, even if it was frustrating at times, I don't like the fact that I'm 150 days later of playtime, not of in-game, like of actual playtime, still using full crystal and the Bofa. I felt like I've made no progress in my ranged, um, because of how powerful the Bofa is, how it's just become the item you use for ranged until you get a T-bow, and then and only then does Masori become a thing you consider, which is just feels weird to me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
that's
mean,
my side tangent.
it's cool that you say that even in 2025, because when they were first proposing the BOFA, I had a lot of issues with I mean, you can look back at my old content where I am just whining. I'm just like, we have to have this BOFA use arrows, because one of the cool things about progression with Iron Man is that you are kind of forced to use rune arrows, which is significantly less damage than using dragon arrows. You can't use
Mhm.
dragon everywhere. You got to like pick and choose your spots. And so rune arrows are kind of the thing. And then as soon as you get a high enough mining level, you start using amethyst, and then you have dragon. And I feel like with Bofa, it's just insta dragon, unlimited of them. You never have to think about it, which in turn leads to that kind of problem with this just being way too good everywhere. And it just doesn't feel like you can ever like sort of upgrade your thing. I feel like I know it makes thematic sense for it not to shoot arrows, but I do think that that might have been a better move, where the Bofa in turn for a lower level Iron Man, you're not getting quite as much power as you would if you just had like unlimited dragon arrows, for example. So
Yeah, I almost would. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there needed to be something more with the Bofa to make it like reasonably like enough of a power scale there. And it's hard because realistically, Magic and especially Mage are very undeveloped combat styles by comparison to Melee. That's kind of what I, was touching on earlier. And as a result of that, they have just way less room for like, or I should say, they have more room for upgrades, but they have less pre-existing room. So if they release the Bofa and it was, let's say, substantially worse than it is now, like weaker by 30, 40%, all that would really mean for the average Iron Man is that ranged becomes as frustrating and lame of a style to use as mage, because mage has this issue where it's the best style up until like level 50, and then it just kind of becomes the most annoying one to use. It's the most expensive, has the most upkeep, and only has like 3 items, and most of them are kind of boring. They're just like a staff that does more damage and you charge it up with runes. And I hate that. I want there to be spec weapons. I want there to be unique niche weapons. I want there to be different attack speeds and styles and all this cool stuff that Melee gets. I want it to be with different styles. But because Bofa is so like it's just so cannibalizing of everything within its field that I never feel the need to use anything else. Like a great example of this recently was in TOA, where my friend was always bringing a blowpipe because he handles the little scarabs on Kefri, not the big ones, the little ones that fly into Kefri. And I started bringing my Bofa because I heard it was much, or sorry, I started bringing my blowpipe because it was a lot better on the Akka Shadows, I heard. But then I realized it really isn't. You can just use the Bofa on them because of course you can. It's the Bofa. It's used on everything, everywhere, all the time. It was just disappointing. I want to use my blowpipe more, but there's just fundamentally almost nowhere where it outperforms the Bofa by comparison, which I guess it shouldn't because it's easier to get. But the point is, I just want more of a horizontal diversity in ranged itemization, and especially magic itemization. Um, and I guess maybe that'll happen with time. But have we really? I mean, I guess we got the Atlatl recently, but it feels like it's just very slow to get there, to get to that point where you have DDS that's still reasonable to use in TOA, obviously. You have the Dragon Claws and the Burning Claws. You have the Void Waker. You have the BGS and the Warham. You have so many. You have the Dragon Underlance. So much cool utility there with Melee that other styles really don't have as much. What do you think
Totally.
about that? I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because it just feels like I don't know, like it feels like they've tried. I mean, I like that you mentioned Atlatl because Atlatl really just is such an interesting, such a cool addition to the
Yeah.
game.
I'm so
Where it,
upset I didn't get to use it more because I love it. It's so cool. I love the
it's
burn. So
so
cool.
freaking powerful, especially if you have high strength early on. If you like AFK sand crabs and stuff, and you just
Yeah.
because that was like big dogs for me when I was playing on my group hardcore. Like I had very high strength. I had like 98 strength, and using that ladle even at like something like 80 range would just a powerhouse. It was disgusting,
Yeah,
and
I feel like I almost robbed myself a little bit of my mid game experience by just getting the Bofa so fast. I say fast. I spent a month and a half in there, but it fast as in like I skipped a lot of the other stuff because I did grind the Eclipse Moon, but because the CG you come in and you build everything in there, you're never using what you've obtained.
yeah.
So as a result, I just kind of never ever used the Atlatl. And I remember I'm doing a lot of LMS right now just for fun. When I'm not fighting bots, I guess it's really fun. And whenever I'm in the Berserker bracket and I get the Atlatl, I just cook everyone. It's such a powerful weapon. It's so fun. The burn effect is really cool. I always want more weapons with unique and satisfying and cool effects attached to them that aren't just like +2 strength bonus. Like that to me, I don't care. Give me cool effects, give me cool animations. I think that's part of what makes Old School RuneScape such a fun game is where, you know, this is such like a random topic that probably no endgame player cares about, but you need to appreciate just how many unique animations there are for the different weapons in the game, right? You have no other game really does that, by the way, right? Like you have a barrel chest anchor, which uses an animation. It's barely used, but it's a completely unique, bespoke animation only associated with that one random weapon you get from a random pirate quest. That's weird, but cool, right? Same with the zombie axe, same with the whip, quite frankly, in many ways. I want like there's a lot of appreciation I have to that. And I wish that there was like, more reason, I guess, to explore all that different stuff because that does spice things up a little bit, right? The different attack speed of that ladle, the 3 tick instead of the 4 tick or the 5 tick, really unique. Really cool to use sometimes. Yeah.
Magic is difficult when it comes to like adding a bunch of weapons. I mean, look, they tried to do it with Eldritch, Volatile. These are some spec weapons and some like prayer restoring weapons. It's just like they're not used much. I mean, it's just
I feel like that's because of how like it's just not tuned. Magic is just it's like the most patchwork skill. For as much as I love the utility that Magic provides, I actually think it's so cool. The alching, the teleports, that's just the coolest thing. It's one of my favorite skills in RuneScape, despite it being so annoying to use in combat because of that. But I think Magic needs to like just go back to the drawing board in the combat, not like reworking the way it works in combat, but just rework the itemization and the stats. Like the fact that it doesn't work on a strength system, it works on a percentile scaling system is really weird. And I now imagining how a new player, and even newer player than me, would go into it and just be so confused. Like, why is this item giving percents, but this item is giving strength bonuses? What does the strength bonus mean compared to the percent? Like, how does that scale? Do the fact that elemental spells do not scale from magic level is just such a I don't know how to fix it, but it's such a weird thing. Imagine explaining that to a new player. It's not intuitive at all. And if they do get it, why would they assume that the power staff does scale? It's just all this random patchworky way to make magic a little bit better. It just kind of needs to go back to the drawing board and maybe we need to reconsider how it scales or what it means to get a magic upgrade and what that looks like in RuneScape today. Not in 2004, but today.
that would be a huge rework. I mean, it would be
Yeah, yeah.
something that would be so good, of course, if it was executed well. But there always is that problem of like it, even if they were to make a perfect system for it, there would instantly become meta changes across the board that people would not be a fan
Would be
of.
upset about. Yeah.
And
I have a question
yeah,
for you though about this.
go for it.
Have you did on your Iron Man? Did you do Huey after the changes?
I haven't done it after the changes yet, but I do
I'd be
have a lot of Huey stuff. Like
curious.
I have everything except for
Oh,
the
you have the
pet.
wand.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have the one.
Have you used the wand after the changes? Because I don't have it, so I'm curious. Like, has it been really noticeably like cool to use after the changes?
It's what's noticeably cool about it, because again, going back to the Wrath rune argument, I just can't use it at its full power.
Yeah.
Well, I'm at a weird stage where I actually have held my account back to some degree earlier on, where I actually did have super anti-fires before most people would get them. So using super anti-fires with the wand, with a Tome of Earth, because again, in order to use a Tome of Earth, for example, against like a Steel Dragon, like if I had a Steel Dragon task, most newbie accounts that have that wand will need to use their anti-dragon shield. But if you
Yeah.
now use the wand in conjunction with the Tome of Earth, with the pages, and then if you had Wrath runes, then you're all of a sudden a powerhouse. But I feel like most noobs at that point are using blood runes, and that's a fucking waste of money. They're using their anti-dragon shield, so they're not getting that extra power oomph. And it's just not that great. The cool thing about the wand, though, with the changes, is just the fact that it has a 10% base damage multiplier. And then on top of that, it can auto cast Ancients. So it's basically like a baby Kodai. It's not even a baby Kodai. I mean, it's just slightly worse than a Kodai. It's amazing for Slayer.
Yeah, I think I love the changes they made with it because I was one of the biggest critics, and at this point I didn't really make YouTube videos about this, but I was one of the biggest internal, to my friends, critics about Huey because I think Jagex is really good at designing bosses. They're great, but the reward space is so difficult to design for in Old School RuneScape, and we can maybe talk about that later. But it's so difficult to design rewards in Old School RuneScape for many reasons, and they completely dropped the ball on Huey rewards initially. Just totally made it a completely irrelevant fight. So I was excited to see the changes. So I was curious to hear what you did there because yeah, I mean, like giving an alternative to do like Olm, is just cool. Like I don't want to always have the same path with magic. If I ever make a hardcore Iron Man, I don't want to just it's Zora, then you get the swamp stand, then it just gets kind
Hmm.
of it's like why? It's like three items in the whole skill. So I like that. Although yeah, I agree. Of course, the Wrath Rune situation is crazy. That's the new most critical video. I really, really want there to be a lot more access to them. I don't know why every rune has drop sources that are like obtainable and normal, but then the Wrath rune is like, no, we are completely gating this almost arbitrary thing because having a even like a level 90 have access to the surge spells. What does that functionally change for the meta is that Zulrah becomes like 5 seconds faster.
Yep.
Who cares? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
who cares? Yeah, yeah, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Like they need to change Wrath runes. And I will say one of the things I really wish they had done with Yama, I just briefly had mentioned this when I was covering the blog on one of my videos, was I wish that Huey Hide was able to give Dragonfire protection per piece.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be cool.
So I really like the idea of like rolling up with a full Huey set, and then you do have 100% anti-fire protection as if you're wearing a shield, and then like per piece you just get a little bit more. Because one, I
Yeah,
think
I love that idea.
yeah, because it would be great to roll up and then be able to use your own offhand, for example, that's not anti-dragon. Because one of the things that's honestly one of the things that's really upsetting for me is just the fact of how rare that Skelly Visage is and how rare the Wyvern Visage is. I don't know what they could do about that, but I do feel like that's such a cool upgrade to eventually get. But it's
Yeah.
so fucking rare that you basically never get to like experience using it on an Iron Man unless you just get incredibly lucky.
Yeah, I
And
maybe just like
yeah.
a Wyvern Slayer boss. I love Slayer bosses, at least their modern versions, and I love because again, I don't like Slayer, so I love having a boss to do because I love bossing. So it's always
Hmm.
something I love. I love. So having like a Wyvern themed Slayer boss that might make them more obtainable. Not a 1 in 1,000, but maybe 1 in 200, 1 in 250 is much more obtainable off a Slayer boss. With maybe a one or two other uniques. There was a unique that they proposed with the Hydra boss. I say this post talk. I obviously didn't play when they created the Hydra, but that like upgraded the whip and made it into like a spine. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't
Enter the
know.
bone whip.
Yeah, that just sounds cool. I don't know how good it would be. I don't know anything about, but that just sounds cool. So maybe they can put that on the Wyvern boss. But um,
That would be
yeah,
cool.
like stuff like that. I think I would love that because yeah, having these random, really, really rare drops that most people don't see, but also aren't that useful. I don't know. I think another great example is the dragon. What is it? The dragon uh, short sword. It's like a one
Oh,
in
the
one
dragon
K.
sword just from
Yeah,
worms you're talking
or
about?
dragon sword. Yes, yes, from worms because it was on Cox at one point.
Yeah.
Um, my like what a rand. I got by the way, I've gotten four of them. I don't even know how, but it's just so just it, where what is this item? You know, like what is that coming
It's
from?
so
Like,
bad.
yeah, it's just such a bizarre, awful, kind of useless item, especially even more now that you have the access to the better Karis version from TOA. So yeah, just a very weird item. I'd rather just a better stab weapon accessible in the early to mid game from maybe Echo Caliphate Queen. I don't know. I don't know,
Hmm.
Jagex. Maybe you want to hire me. I don't know. But the point is that yeah, I do agree with you. I think that these kind like the visages, right? You were talking about the Wyvern ones. They're so cool. They look cool. They have cool effects. And on top of that, they really synergize in a cool way with your magic and range setups. There was one other item in the entire game that gives a range strength bonus, and that's the offhand from Chambers of Zarek, right?
Well, there's
Um,
there's the buckler, but then there's also the Odium ward
Oh
that,
yes, the
yeah.
wilderness one. Yes, I forgot about that too. Yeah. So there's the wilderness one, there's the ward, or the buckler, sorry, and
Yeah.
then there's the ward, and then there's this ranged visage one. So we have a wilderness one, we have like a quote unquote end game item, and then we have maybe something in the middle there to introduce people to range strength bonuses. Could be cool.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know. I think it really is just upsetting that there's these really cool upgrades like honestly, the Dragonfire Award is one of the coolest upgrades you could get, and you just basically can expect to never get it. And then as
Yeah.
soon as you do get it, it's completely useless because by that point you just have like assumingly you just have like a bunch of other weapons that you'd prefer to use, like a T-bow or something, or whatever you have at that point by the time you've killed 5,000 Vorkath. Christ.
Yeah, I wonder like this conversation it might make a lot of like mains like scoff because it's like yeah, it doesn't matter for them, which is
Yeah.
reasonable. You know, you don't engage in this stuff. That's totally okay. I support that. I
Mhm.
like the Grand Exchange. I like the economy. I support it. I just want to clarify because sometimes people say like I'm too Iron Man brained.
Mhm.
But you know, my take is always make it work as a game, then make it work as an economy. I think if you don't have a functioning system in the game, um, allowing the economy to just kind of supersede that is just not great game design, right? Because you're just making dead content that is only buoyed by the existence of a secondary system to skip that content. Um, I think both of these things can work simultaneously. And we've seen this. You know, the economy works 95% of the time very well with quote unquote Ironman friendly things too. You know, it's not like the Perilous Moons items are worth nothing because you get them one after the other, right? I would say the opposite. They're actually holding their value pretty well, especially Blood Moon, right? So like, I don't know. I feel like things are okay. You can find a balance there without having to do a one or the other, right? You don't need everything to be untradeable, but simultaneously, you don't need everything to be a one in 5,000 off a random Slayer creature no one likes doing too. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it is tough though because you got to find out like how to balance it. One of the ideas I kind of was thinking of was like, what if all dragons gave like visage tokens or something that were rare, but basically whenever you're killing dragons, you kind of get these untradeable little tokens, and you can almost like build your own visage at some point of
Mm.
any of the three or something. And again,
Yeah.
what would that do to the economy? Because obviously that means every single visage at some point would just end up being the same value because you're picking and choosing which ones you'd want to build. And so any main is just going to always build the most expensive one, which ends up being like Yama, plate, and bottoms, which like I'm pretty sure they're the exact same price because you got to like choose your piece if you're doing those one contracts.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's not that big of an issue. It's just something I think about. The other thing, oh crap, I just missed it as I was talking about that. It was something I wanted to touch on. Um,
I,
yeah,
I, I do
totally
I
lost
do
it.
I do
Go
have a
for it.
question though. I do have a
Yeah.
question, and this maybe leads into a longer conversation, but it's the most interesting like criticism slash issue. It's a future proofing issue that I have with Old School, and it's something I took note of earlier on in my gameplay, but I couldn't really put it into words yet, because in the early to mid game, your progression feels incredible. There's issues with progression in the end game, and this is where this what I'm about to bring up stems from, and I would love to hear your perspective on it. I talk about it with like everyone I speak to about Old School because it's such an interesting topic, and like how do you solve this is also very interesting, and everyone has a different take, I think. But essentially, you know, I say itemization in the end game in RuneScape, Old School, is like packing a clown car. It's so like tightly packed right now that whenever Jagex needs to create an item that is between a mega rare and just the best normal rare, it's becoming more and more like absurd. Where like you're, oh, this item is a +2 strength bonus over this. It's not even a max hit most of the time. Like enjoy. Like it's just so these are becoming so tight, much tighter because we're slowly encroaching on the mega rare power wise. And that will happen, right? Whether you like it or not, it's gonna happen. Whether it's in 10 years, 20 years, or in 5 years, eventually the normal slash weapon that they're gonna add in however many years is gonna be almost as good as the scythe. And that's terrifying, right? For a lot of players, because one requires 400 hours to get, and the other may require like 20 or 30 or 40, right? So, what do we do about that? Like, we can't just keep building up the power there. As much as I think power creep is reasonable and I actually like it, that's how you make incentives for progression. I think that every MMO has power creep. It's totally fine. But we can't also just have a hard limit on power too. What do we do? And there's a couple options there that people have posited. I know, I think Arcane talked about it a little bit too, where you create more horizontal progression with like different weaknesses, elemental weaknesses, crush, stab, slash, bolt weaknesses, arrow weaknesses. That's a way to do it, to kind of mitigate that growth. But eventually, when we really feel like we're encroaching upon that, those values are going to start dropping cataclysmically, right? They're going to crash. At least that's how I interpret it. So before I continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm actually one of those people that loves the very, very, very small power
Okay,
stepping, like
interesting.
micro steps, because I always bring up the example of primordial boots. Primordial
Yeah.
boots came out and it was a literal 1+ strength over dragon boots. And dragon
Mhm.
boots you can get as a 1 in 128 drop from doing Slayer. And you had a literal 1 in 512 drop from a brand new Slayer boss at level 91 that's dropping a crystal to attach to it that has 1 strength bonus over it and 2 accuracy on all 3 styles. That's it.
Yeah.
And I loved it because those boots still rocked 30 mil as
Mm.
the price because it was the best in slot. It didn't matter how minor the upgrade. It's the fact that it is best in slot that is good enough. So in my opinion, and this is what I've always held, is like you don't need to make a shadow 40% better than the second best thing in order to, and again, this is an unpopular take. A lot of people just love massive power creep for a mega rare. In my opinion, you don't need to go that far. You just need to make it ever so slightly better than the second best thing. That's it. And I know your question is kind of bridging that gap between the second best and the mega rare, but I really do feel like you have all these small increments to add where it does mean something. Seriously, if a shadow was just a slight bit better than the Sanguinesti when it had come out, let's just ignore the fact that like the harmonized staff existed, which kind of confused things. But if it was just what we had was the Sanguinesti, which I believe the Sanguinesti was, by the way, one of the coolest upgrades because it wasn't necessarily a mega rare, but it was still a very rare drop from the hardest raid in the game at the time. And all it did was had 1 max hit over the Trident of the Swamp. That's it. 1 max hit over it.
It also healed you though, right? Like that was kind of cool.
It also healed you, but it was expensive to heal. But yeah, but I mean, just DPS wise, the healing was amazing, of course. But just DPS wise, 1 max hit over it. And that was fucking awesome, in my opinion. That was so cool. And I feel like that's all they ever need to do, in my opinion. I feel like mega rares, yeah, I guess with these days, with the culture and with the player base, how they see it, you could go a little bit further, but really don't go crazy with it. The Shadow went way too crazy with it. And Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so
I mean,
that's a little bit of my take. I want to hear
so
a little
so
bit more
it's
from you.
interesting, right? This is why I like asking this question because everyone has like a unique opinion on it.
Hmm.
I definitely like I do disagree, generally speaking, with like how incremental you prefer things.
Hmm.
Although I'm not, that's not to say like what you're saying is invalid. I think it's probably like in many ways it's healthy for the game. But for me, it's like if the game's asking me, 100 hours. I think how long is SRA? The SRA grind, 120 hours, 110 hours.
One's a
Um,
beast. Yeah.
yeah, it's a big one. And, I went dry in Vardorvis as much as I like to fight. It's like 2,100 kills. Like, goddamn. Like, uh, I enjoyed the grind. I really like at least three of the four DD2 bosses. And I, great, awesome. Got the weapon. And I feel like if I invested 110 hours and I started attacking people with the SRA and I didn't even notice even any increase over my previous weapon, I would get just completely deflated. And the reason I say that is because my like understanding of burnout in games and honestly just in general is that burnout stems from a feeling of stagnancy, like you're not moving anywhere. You're in
Hmm.
gridlock. It happens when you're working a dead end job without any promotions for 10 years. You feel like you're just stagnant. So you end up burning out heavy. The same would apply to, for example, if you're running a YouTube channel for a long time and you're putting in just an insane amount of effort and that's your only source of income, but you're not seeing any growth in your subscriber count, you burn out because you feel like you're stagnant regardless of what you do. And the same would apply to Old School Runescape and just to games in general. If you're putting in a lot of time into something and the output feels either identical or very similar or not, or you don't get anything, you just go really dry for 5,000 kills, you might get burnt out because you feel like there's none of that moving forward. So it's a balance. Not creating an item like Shadow, I agree. Shadow's a bit egregious, especially for how boring the item is. It's just an item that does a lot of damage. There's just not really anything interesting to consider with the Shadow. Um, that like, yeah, 40% over the next best thing, kind of absurd. And it also makes new fights that are balanced around the Shadow, like the Whisper, in my opinion, so tedious. I had to do the whole thing, all 800 odd kills with the Trident of the Swamp, and I hated it because I knew every second that if I had the Shadow, it would be like a minute and a half faster, and you're just
Yeah.
like, what the hell? But regardless, um, so for me,
And
it's
that's and I just
mm,
wanted to point out, like, in that situation is exactly what I'm talking about. When there's an upgrade that's so, like, so much better than the second best, you feel like shit not using it. Like, I hate
yeah,
that feeling. And I
yeah.
don't feel like any weapon should have that big of a disparity. And just also, just to touch on your point,
Mm.
sorry to interrupt, but
No,
just
no, please go.
the Soul Reaper axe, um, even if it was not as big of an upgrade, I mean, it is balanced pretty well, I think,
Yeah, it is. It is.
in between. But even if it was, just slightly lower, let's say, but it still is better than everything else you can kind of get beforehand, I would say the way to address that is to make it just less rare. I mean, that's simply, if the drop was not a 1 in 1080 or whatever it is from Vardorvis, it was more like a 1 in 512 per piece, and then everything else was kind of in line with that. So now the axe isn't a 120-hour grind, it's like a 60-hour grind. It just feels more reasonable to achieve, and then it feels like it's in that proper place. Like, okay, you didn't get quite the upgrade you wanted, but it still has that cool niche use. It's still good, but it didn't feel like you had to, I don't know, just
Yeah,
dedicate your whole life to
and
it.
and I do agree with that, right? Like whether the Soul Reaper gave me four max hits or one, if it's all proportional, like based on how much the game demands. It's 110 hours of my life, 120 hours. So I'm like, it better give me more than one. Like
Hmm.
yeah. But if it was like like a 20, 30, 40 hour grind, then yeah, maybe I'd be okay with one. A great example being the Noxious Halberd, right? That's an awesome weapon. And I really like the place it is in the game. And it's a very satisfying weapon to create. And it's not super rare. It took me 500 Araxor kills to get it, maybe 450. Super reasonable in my opinion, and it's a solid increase over the Abyssal Tentacle, but it gets devalued at a high point from the Blade of Saildor, right? And it's obviously the SRA is better in most situations. So cool, I like that. That's a great place for a very incremental upgrade. Obviously, because of the way mega rares are designed, because they take so much longer, that's where that incentive to make them so good happens or comes from. And for me, like the the mega rare is awesome conceptually. When I see one, I'm like, yeah, I want that shit. That shit's awesome. But also, they're so problematic from a design perspective. Not only because they cap where an item can go damage-wise, because you don't want to devalue billions of dollars of GP overnight, but also because inherently, by asking a player for 500 hours of their life and giving them a 1 strength bonus plus 2 accuracy in all melee combat styles like the prims, it would just, I feel like there would be like a mental breakdown at some point. We're going to see a streamer like have a meltdown because it's just, there's no way they're going to go 3,000 cocks dry, pause, on a Tebow, but, you know, really feel happy that now they might get a +1 max hit in a specific set of armor on a specific boss sometimes. Like that I just don't imagine that. So maybe like having things be a lot more common can really alleviate that potential mental breakdown.
Yeah, and that's really what I mostly advocate for. Like the prims are a very, very extreme example of something. I mean, I'm totally okay with it bumping up a little bit more than that. I mean, something like the Infernal Cape gives, 4 extra strength and I believe like 3 extra accuracy over the Fire Cape, which is just awesome, and it feels worthwhile. But yeah,
here's a question I have for you. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to cut you off, but I just, now that I have it in my head. So the issue here, I think, is that the progression is too bracketed. Like it's 4 strength, 1 max hit, 4 strength, 1 max hit, right? Essentially. So,
but there's more than just the weapon.
Because,
every little bit of strength goes away. So I mean, you just upgrade a little bit of boot strength, a little bit of glove strength, like everything,
and
adds
eventually
up.
you get that 1 max hit. Yeah. And I almost wonder, like, oh man, things might get a bit edgy here, but I almost wonder if like making stats like a little bit more wide, I guess, or is that the right word to use? Where like instead of 4 strength, it's 40. So the incrementality there can feel more tangible rather than like than intangible. And the best I can give an example might be more clear in that regard. And this is going to be the worst example to give for an Old School RuneScape fan base because it's going to be RuneScape 3 example. But it's when RuneScape, and I heard about this, when they increased the HP times 10. When they made you from 99 HP to 990. And the reason why, or at least one of the benefits of doing that, you could argue, is that now let's say it's a 40 strength increase, and 40 strength is 1 max hit in some situations, right? Now when you get a plus 20 instead of a plus 40, instead of it not being a max hit, it's actually like a 5 max hit instead of a 10, right? Like that's the benefit of scaling things out a little bit more, where you can actually tangibly see the increase without needing to invest an inordinate amount of time to hit that next bracket of max hit. That's like, I'm not saying this should happen. I don't worry for people that are upset about that, but like, it's interesting to consider what psychologically that could do for a player to motivate them to continue doing it a longer grind,
Yeah. No, I mean, I would definitely be against that just simply because it would just be so foreign, but I understand the concept of it. And I think, I mean, one of the things I've loved with Magic just recently is they have added percentages, I guess like a decimal point. So the classic Sears ring you get from DKs actually has 0.25.
Oh, 0.25, my bad.
Yeah. And then if you enchant it and get the imbued, it's 0.5. And I feel like with a lot of things, you could actually add those increments. And I think that would be kind of a cool way to go about it. So like, for example, if Blood Moon had been like 3.5 for the chest plate, then it would be just perfectly balanced in my opinion, where, okay, BCB and Torso still just barely get it. But then there would be some other upgrades, like some, I don't know, maybe some rune boots that actually give 2.5 something. So then it ends up kind of balancing out. So you can kind of mix and match your gear a little bit more. And there's not just just the flat number 1 is like the smallest increase. I do like the decimal places. And I think I think that'd be kind of cool. Also, on that point, what's shocking, I'm actually just about to hit 93 Slayer on this account, so I'm going to get my occult soon. But I feel like, where the hell are the mid-game magic damage amulets? Like, is there really nothing until occult? There's nothing. and then just 5% right there. I feel like, and then the same thing with the Tormented Bracelet. They should, I know for a fact at some point they will add some sort of bracelet, some sort of magic glove that has 2.5% until you get the Zenite, or an occult that at some point, maybe 70 Slayer, you can get something that has 2%. But those are some much
Yeah, I think
needed
filling out the mid
middle
game with
ground.
some of these bridge items would be really great, right? They did it with the prayers on the Giants bosses, and those went over really well, right?
So good. Yep.
Yeah, they're much more satisfying. I remember getting the wow, I'm forgetting what it's called. Not the giant one, but from Cox, the one that increased your ranged strength and accuracy and defense and all that. And I remember getting it while I'm doing CG. I think I was while I was doing CG. Yeah, yeah. Because I remember going into Hunlif and it's like a night and day. It's such a huge increase, you know? So
Yep.
maybe having something to bridge that gap with those giant items could be really great. I would think that would be awesome. The reason I bring up this really big, like overarching future proofing issue, to hear some feedback, is because even if we go really incremental, really granular, eventually, you know, we're gonna hit that, whether it's in 10 years, 20 years, 25. And obviously, at that point, if it's 25 years down the line, it's like, yeah, we'll get there when we get there. Don't worry. But it's still interesting to think about because here's the maybe the hottest take, and it's not necessarily super hot, but it's kind of like it just makes, I think, old school RuneScape players kind of immediately recoil when I start talking about it. Not because I'm like super adamant about it, but just because it's interesting to consider. I like just it's a theory craft, you know. I'm TheoryWise, so it makes sense. And uh, the idea here is to expand the game's like the kinds of mechanics the game rewards. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean like adding an ability bar or anything. So not evolution of combat, but it's essentially look at the things that people do in the game right now. They prayer flick, for example. And not even just prayer flick, they lazy flick, right? They make sure to activate their prayer on the tick they're gonna get hit, they avoid the damage, all good. And now it's like that's an emergent mechanic that players discovered they can do and save prayer doing. Um, and the reward from that is emergent too. It's like, yeah, you lose less prayer. But what if now Jagex is like, we want to make more horizontal progression instead of just going upwards, we go sideways and in turn go upwards from that. Um, what if we were to incentivize those things with new kinds of mechanics? That would be like my like game design brain kind of turning a little bit and being like, well, that would be kind of interesting, right? And I'm totally pitching you something here that might just immediately be the worst thing ever.
Let's
But
hear
I'd
it.
be interested. Yeah. So imagine this. Okay. Whew. I talked about this with my group Ironman partner like a couple weeks back, and he was like, "Bro, do not say this to anyone." But keep that shit hidden. But I'll do it anyway. Imagine a parry mechanic where if you use the prayer, like you lazy flick the prayer on the same tick you're gonna get hit, you still get the same bonus. You lose less prayer points. You might mitigate X amount of damage based on the first thing you're fighting, but you also parry the attack and attack one tick faster as a result. Now, before people recoil, here's the benefit. I'll do the pros and cons. The cons is that it will probably increase overall power from players, but it only does so in two ways. It rewards high skill, players. It rewards knowing the fight, so you only really start doing that after you're already in the groove of the fight. It never breaks rhythm. It's within that rhythm anyway. People already do that with most fights they do a lot of times. So it fits that rhythm centric mechanics and vibe of old school RuneScape. It doesn't, not feel old school. And on top of all of that, it also has this really unique kind of benefit of you start a fight and it's really exciting. You don't know the fight that well. You're still exploring it. You're figuring out how it works. But 500 kills in, you're bored as hell because you're like, just give me the goddamn item already. The benefit of this would be it incentivizes you to get better at the fight by risking more and as a result benefiting from faster kills as a result from that. So it has that triple effect, and now they can create items that really benefit that. Well, what if you get 3 perfect parries, you get 5 prayer points back, or you get some spec energy back, or things like that that are completely side to just increasing a strength bonus or a slash bonus or a stab bonus. But they're all done through skill expression. They're not just flat increases when you get the item of just doing more damage. Now the power is increased for everyone who has that item. It's kind of like a very skill expressive power creep. That's my pitch. I just love to hear some
No, I
thoughts on
mean
that.
that's something I've always been thinking about is how can we add interesting prayers? Because I mean, one of the things that's really fun is like the final phase of Nex, where you it feels like there's a really cool opportunity to almost like I'm trying to think how this would work, because when Nex is attacking you, it would almost be cool to have some sort of like defensive prayer. So I've thought about the parry prayer. I've thought about even like shield mechanics where equipping a shield could maybe reflect some damage or
Yeah.
something, or maybe even have like a shield spec orb thing that has, you build up a little bit of charges from getting hit with the shield and then you can unleash it. The parry mechanic's really cool. I want to get your take on how powerful this would actually be. Are you talking about a full vengeance style, like where whatever it hits, it's negating from you? So like you're not taking any damage, or are you taking the damage and you're also dealing the damage? And is this
I
an overhead, so you can't pray the overhead, or how does this
So
work exactly?
I would say that it's actually just integrated into the core of the game. It's not a prayer. It's just a benefit of praying the overhead one tick on the tick you're supposed to when you're lazy flicking, for example, right? So if you do it correctly on that one tick, you activate the parry in passively, like from the game, and it's not like a vengeance or anything where you still get the benefit of the prayer, and you just attack one tick faster afterwards. So a 4 tick attack from a whip becomes a 3 tick attack from a whip if you do it perfectly. If you don't do it perfectly, you take a hit, so you take damage potentially. On things like Nightmare, goddamn, you're definitely going to take more than a couple damage. So it really incentivizes that kind of risk reward and really helps, I think, players that are really good at the game or players that are very used to a boss fight really push for better and faster kills. And I think, and maybe this is a hot take for some people, it alleviates the very glaring issue of speed kills. I think that speed CAs and all this kind of stuff suck in old school because old school is so RNG driven. You're kind of just waiting until you hit that jackpot. Like I got my nightmare, grandmaster speed kill or whatever, and I did not feel like I got it, like I earned it. It just kind
Yeah.
of felt like it happened because yeah, my thing hit great. But with this mechanic, they can actually tune around you doing the fight well and prayer flicking well, and you get rewarded from that skill expression. I'm not obviously referring to people like Mutts here who would like do
Hmm.
all kinds of crazy stuff for speed kills, but they're way beyond grandmaster speed times. I'm talking like the CAs and stuff. So that would be my idea for that. Obviously very contentious, but I
No,
would
I
think
don't.
it's
I
kind
don't
of
even
cool.
think it's that contentious. I think it's just really interesting to see, 'cause- because I like the idea that you're saying where it just your next attack increases a tick faster. I almost think almost a better route to take that wouldn't be as
It's very powerful.
yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
just trying to think how to balance it, because I'm almost thinking, what if the parry prayer, because I'm thinking maybe it'll just be a secondary. It won't even be an overhead, but like you would still have your overheads, but like right next to piety or something, you'd just have like a parry prayer as well or something. You just
Yeah.
like rearrange it somewhere and you click it on. It has to be for that one tick when you do get attacked. If you miss it, that I think what would be cool to balance this properly is to make it cost actual prayer whenever it's
Mm.
activated. So whenever you activate it, it costs maybe 3 prayer just directly, and there's no way of one tick flicking it. I mean, it's just like as soon as it's on for one tick. And in fact, I wouldn't even be opposed to it only being able to be activated for one tick. So it's not even something you have to turn on and off. It's just you click it
Mm.
once and then
Yeah.
it turns off guaranteed the next tick, and
Yeah,
it
honestly,
drains
like,
3
yeah,
prayer.
I do like that because I was gonna say if it's an own individual prayer, it kind of removes some of the skill of like needing to know which prayer to hit. But if it's only on for one tick, and it costs prayer, that kind of mitigates that loss of expression there. Because yeah, I do like that. And it'll be really cool. I feel like you can still play. It's still old school. You can still hold the prayer if you want, and literally nothing changes for you at all. But if you really want to engage in the skill expression, here's a mechanic in the game that not only explains how to essentially explains how to do lazy flicking, which right now is not really explained. It's just something you read on a guide, I guess, based on what we can see from these World of Warcraft players and how they learn that.
Hmm.
It's explained in the game. It's tutorialized in the game without ever needing to do a pop up like this is how this works. Like people just kind of inherently start understanding the tick system, which I feel like there's a lot of benefits to that, and you can create so many cool items based off those synergies that it opens up a whole new branch of itemization that is skill expressive, which is positive, and as a result doesn't just inherently power creep everyone, And simultaneously to that, it opens up item diversity that's not just like more slash bonus or more strength bonus or more stab bonus or whatever. Now we have this whole separate form of growth there. Like, I mean, rapiers are like the parry weapon in the real world. And that'd be kind of cool. Like the repo stay. Like, what if the Grazi rapier, instead of it just being a worse version, well, it just doesn't have that many uses. It's not a worse
Hmm.
version of whip or anything, but it just doesn't have that many uses. What if when you do that with the rapier, you immediately guarantee like 1 to 3 damage back, like a reflection, just because you're using that weapon? That could kind of make it a unique niche thing somewhere. It could unironically make it decent. Probably not on next because you're guaranteed a small piece of damage. I don't know. Probably not on next. But the point is that there is some creativity there that even better, like much better developers than I am, can come up with just off of a single addition mechanically to a game that already utilizes the very same method of engagement. Now we're just figuring out how to evolve it, pause, how to change it or enhance it or incentivize it without adding a stupid action bar or reworking the way the entire combat system works. That to me is what changes old school.
What one thing I would love to see, and it might just be going against what you just said of like having an action bar, is I would love it. I'm just looking at my game right now. You got the HP orb, prayer orb, run orb, and then you got the spec orb. I loved the introduction of the Soul Reaper axe having a secondary use for that spec orb. But what I would almost love to see is just a permanent. There's two different spec orbs right now. There's the default spec orb, and then there's the special sort of activity bar thing that's there for only when you're using certain things. So basically, like, there's always going to be two different things right there, and this will have dual use. It'll have PVM use, but it'll also have skilling use. And so something like a rapier maybe has a parry mechanic that's not even a prayer. It's simply with this
Attached to
secondary.
it.
Yeah, it's a secondary orb that actually has now a use. And what it does is you can't parry all the time, but it charges up the more you use the weapon, the more you attack with it. It gets a charge where you do end up having that parry attack. And what it does
Yeah.
is maybe even cuts your next attack in half. So instead of being a 4-tick attack, it's actually a 2-tick attack for the next thing. So
Yeah, if you're charging it up, you can make it a lot more powerful because
yeah,
you're using it a lot more incrementally. Yeah, for sure. And
and
I think
yeah,
my actual group Iron Man literally pitched something very similar to this on the subreddit at one point because he was like, "Yeah, that would be so cool." And no one at this point, not a lot of people are very excited about the Grazi Rapier unless they're selling it because it's such a kind of been devalued by the Fang, kind of been power crept a little bit. It'd be cool to give it something, its own thing.
totally. And I think beyond that, I mean, now you have the introduction of shields, for example. So now maybe a shield has some sort of charging effect where you use the shield enough where you can't just be constantly equipping it, unequipping it. This would kind of get rid of the defender scape that we've kind of like sunken ourselves into and make
Yeah.
it so you can use shields, and then shields even have their own effect. So as soon as you charge it up enough, maybe you unleash the thing, and maybe it isn't even damage output, but maybe it's just now that you've been wielding it for so long, for the next minute or two, now you actually do have straight up like flat armor that's attached to you for a little bit. So in the most hectic part of the fight, or at some point, you can activate it and now you get like extra defensive bonuses. And then I want to just touch briefly on the skilling side of it. It would be so cool to have different skilling tools that have crazy uses that aren't attached to the spec bar, because the problem with the spec bar is you can always just abuse it by hitting your pool or hitting the Narda thing. But if
Yeah.
something has to be used for a certain duration, or cut a certain amount of logs, or chop a certain amount of logs and what am I trying to say? Mine a certain amount of ores, you'd eventually build up enough for some fucking dragon claw pickaxe type thing to be utilized, where you just go ham on a rock and get like fucking 5 resources from it like instantaneously. And
I
yeah.
totally support that concept. I think like people sometimes confuse like what we're talking about is like making mechanics deeper.
Hmm.
We're not talking about adding new mechanics on top of the game itself, right? Like
Yeah.
kind of a lot of the stuff we're talking about is just like creating a use for something that exists that is currently underused. And I always support that kind of stuff. Obviously, imagining that it's balanced well and all that kind of stuff. In the ideal situation, I always support that kind of stuff because, yeah, I think that you I know agree with me here, and we both agree together. Like skill expression is super important. That's how you get people to want to get good at the game. That's if we go back way to the first topic for a moment. If you ask me why do WoW players play the game now versus back when, it's because there's a stigma about old school RuneScape. There's a bigger stigma about RuneScape 3, but there's a stigma about old school RuneScape. It's that it's a passive, boring, click once and wait meme game that people play because they're not, they can't afford WoW or they're not good enough. But the reality is a lot different. As someone who's done the highest, most difficult top end content in World of Warcraft, and as someone who's now, stepping foot into the end game of RuneScape, has done the vast majority of bosses, like many times, the I will say right now that individually, old school RuneScape is way harder to play than World of Warcraft. It's not even close. Individually, WoW has different group content. It's a whole different topic. But from like what you are asked to do on some of the hardest bosses in RuneScape, it absolutely pales in comparison, or I should say, World of Warcraft absolutely pales in comparison for like individual responsibility. However, that is not how people understand the game, and that's partly because the game has not done a good job of explaining that. That's why I love Scurious. And by including baseline elements like this, it's showing people that there's a lot more to RuneScape than zoning into Lumbridge after Tutorial Island and fishing shrimp for 2 hours and then logging back on World of Warcraft. And that's something I talk about in my new player video that I released like my previous, like 2 videos ago, I believe, where I talk about the new player experience because there's such a big problem with aimlessness. And that's not a benefit of sandbox games. That's a issue. Like you're supposed to give players the opportunity to know what they can do and then have them figure out how to. That's what a sandbox game is. You don't zone into Minecraft and go, what do I do? I guess I'll just chop a tree. Like, no, you zone in and you start building stuff because it's intuitive. With old school RuneScape right now, it's not intuitive enough to know that the game offers all of this cool shit. So it's really crucial, in my opinion, if we want to keep all these amazing new players joining the game, to show them that it's a lot deeper and more interesting and more exciting than just chopping a log. And that's super important with skill expressive skilling, especially.
Yeah, and it's such a balance because I feel like a lot of players, love the very, very chill vibes of it, and there is some part of the game where as soon as there are better ways to do things, you start feeling bad for not doing it. I'm trying to think of what was being said. I made a ramble on something just talking about how like people don't like feeling like they're being super inefficient. They don't like it when there's
Yeah.
too much that you can do to maximize XP and then you're just not doing it because it feels worse and worse and worse. So some of the time with certain, like for example, if Guardians of the Rift, like there's something to be said about a forced AFK, like something where you have to just sit here for 2 minutes and mine this stuff to start the game. You don't feel bad about it because it's part of the mini game that they've kind of forced onto you. If all of a sudden that wasn't the efficient thing to do and you had to actually like gig a sweat to really maximize the mini game, it just wouldn't feel good. Like you would always be feeling slightly bad about like not doing it. So I feel like there always has to be that in mind of like not going too extreme on things. But I think what we've talked about here is very like careful with it. It's just like it's
Yeah,
not too extreme. It's just very little things that can add more interest.
I just want to clarify that I don't want anyone to have the impression that I'm advocating for removing like the chill at I love the chill stuff in old school RuneScape. That's actually part of how to advertise it well. Like it has that benefit of you can be super engaged or you can be super chill and you're progressing anyway. And then if you talk to me about why WoW players are so excited about that is because they're not used to it. For World of Warcraft, especially for the retail like RS3 version of the game, you're always on. If you're doing any kind of proper progression, you're doing something like you're on. And otherwise, you are essentially just cause slop. It's slop content. Like it might as well not exist. And with old school RuneScape, you are constantly in that influx, or you constantly have that flux of progression through different methods. Like there's the benefit of the AFK method that you can have on the other monitor, or on the other computer, or on your phone, or your iPad, whatever. And you can feel confident in picking that because you know that you're getting less, but you're putting in less. But just telling players that there is also more they can do too. That's all I think all I'm advocating for is like here's the AFK stuff. A lot of people are aware that it's a very chill game, but not a lot of people are aware that it also can be more if you want that, if you prefer that too.
Yeah. Okay, I want to switch gears and talk about one of the latest uploads you have, which is talking about polling, like that, just how OSRS really is unique in the fact that polling exists, and there's obviously downsides to it. One of them being like you don't really get the surprises that other games can offer, and you kind of know exactly what's about to come out. But at the same time, it has allowed for the community to feel heard and to feel like they're shaping the game. But then again, you got, like the low IQ, but I don't know if that's derogatory, but just people that maybe don't play as much that just want the game to just get updates regardless of how healthy or unhealthy it is. So I want to almost like give the brief sort of overview of how you see polling in the game, whether you see it as an overall net positive or net negative. Because obviously I will have your channel like linked in the description. So people that want to take the full deep dive, it's like an hour video. It's very, very informative. It's really interesting as well, hearing it from you, somebody that hasn't been playing for, 12 years.
Well, polling, by and large, I love it, right? I think that the consequences speak for themselves in that the game essentially brought RuneScape as an IP back to life. Without Old School Runescape and without the polling system, in part, it just wouldn't have gone anywhere. So there's issues with it, but by and large, I'm in support of the polling system. It does open up a lot of interesting conversations because every issue that the polling system has is essentially just an issue of democracy. Like there's positives and negatives to it. We have to just all believe that it's for the greater good and that there's the truth somewhere, in the middle between the two extremes. And that, that's essentially what democracy is. I think that, as I think I outlined a little bit ago, like there's two extremes. There's the really new players that don't know much about the game but just want stuff because it's cool and exciting and the blog seems neat. And then there's the really, the older, more conservative players that are a bit more jaded, a bit more concerned with the game, and they're a bit more, averse to change. Being averse to change is how you kill the game, but also accepting this flood of potential nonsense content is also how you kill the game. So the push and pull between these two extremes is always going to yield a median response that, by and large, will be a net positive. That's why so many updates in Old School RuneScape have been pretty positive. Like, there's obviously some really bad ones, there's obviously good ones, but I think it's hard to say for a game that's the only popular MMO on Earth right now that's growing that it's net negative. It's clearly not. Something is working. Something is functioning properly. So when I look at the polling system, I see, a non-representative democracy, right? I see a democracy that's just based on, a supermajority's opinion, and there's issues with that. But I am by and large in support of it. I like what I see. I vote in the polls, and if anything, I'm a voting absolutist. I think that polls need to be pushed on players more. For as much as that might include people that don't know much about the game, the weird thing about that is that their voices are almost as important in a strange way because what they're engaging in and the reason they don't know much about the game is a problem with the game. So when you kind of see that from their perspective, it's like, why does this person not know how this works when it's a very basic element of the game? Maybe there's an issue with the game and its ability to teach that player how something works. That's really interesting. Or even a really new player who hates agility. He's like, oh my God, just remove this stupid shit from the skill. I think Soda Poppin says something like that, right? But that's really valuable insight. That's why it's so important for them to vote, because Jagex needs that insight to understand that, hey, maybe we should tap the run energy changes a little bit, which they did this year, right? That's the only way to know that. If we're only tapping the elite, quote unquote, we're also never going to see stuff like the amazing influx of new and mid-game updates from last year because people always vote in their self-interests, by and large. And so yeah, that's my long ramble on it. So maybe that's a hot take. I think maybe increasing the average, the total level a little bit. I think in the video I go from like 300 to 750 or something like that. But I still want the new player's voice, not just the new player me. As much as I am still a new player in the old school RuneScape sense of the word, I'm like closer to 2200. I'm like what 10 I don't levels off 2200 total. I have like 200 days of playtime. I am not a new player in the scope of like gaming in general at this point,
Hmm.
compared to like these WoW players. But these WoW players are giving truly crucial information to Jagex. And I think I want older players, and me included in this sense, to be aware of that. For as much as you might think it's stupid that they're complaining about X, Y, and Z thing because they don't know about it, that's still really insightful. And people should value that almost as much as they value, like, I don't know, No Monkey's opinion on the new Endgame content. Because yeah, he is super talented and knows and knowledgeable about that. But what about Scurious? What about the rat? That's my take on it.
Yeah. So what's next for foreseeable video essays? Is there something that's on your mind that you're just like, I'm super excited to share this video essay on things? So it does feel like you think about this stuff a lot, and you probably, I mean, and also I guess secondary question is like, how much do you plan these videos out with scripting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll do the second one first.
Okay.
I think that generally uh, it depends on the script. Like my really popular recent video that I uploaded, the one that was like why WoW players are switching. I think I wrote that in one night at like 4 in the morning. Just like I was seeing something, I was seeing a trend, and I'm like, I have a lot to say about this trend because I'm one of these people, technically. I call myself the first generation, WoW refugee. These are the second generation WoW refugees. These are the second wave coming in. It's very interesting, and I have a lot of background on all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'll talk about it. My longer videos tend to be a bit longer. It depends on how the script is sitting. The democracy video that you just brought up, the one about polling, that's been written for like 2 months. It's just that's been something that's been a, just a constant thing I'm editing through. My scripts tend to be written very quickly. I'm like a binge writer. I sit down for 10 hours and I write, but it's the editing process and the rewriting process. Some scripts fully get rewritten. Other scripts, I let them sit for a couple days, then I return. I'm like, this sucks. So I rewrite it again or change certain things. It's usually between 1 to 2 weeks of the scripting process. Then it's a day or two of recording, depending on how long the script is and how hoarse my voice becomes. And then it's around like a week of editing, I would say. And that's not counting the research before the script writing, but usually that occurs like just because I'm interested in something. Like the polling stuff, I was just looking at the wiki and seeing old polls and reading about it. And that's where that kind of incentive came from to write that script. Um, and before I move on to the first question, do you have anything to say about that?
No, I mean that's brilliant to kind of get the insight of just like, okay, this is how it's done. It's not just right off the cuff. You do spend a lot of time in rewriting and actually researching. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I want to make sure I'm correct. There's elements because here's the thing with making YouTube videos, and I'm sure you get one thing wrong, it's the only thing people talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I have an example of this in my drop rates in U video, which is a video I made right after the Yama drop rates, and that was a video I wrote really quickly because I wanted it to be in response to the Yama rate changes. And I talk about like the input output, what the game is demanding, what you're inputting, and all that kind of stuff. And in the video, I show the wiki for the cost of Oathplate and I accidentally use the unadjusted numbers from release rather than the actual trade prices of Oathplate. Such a dumb mistake. Such a
Mm,
glaring oversight. But it's like 1/80th of the video. I talk about it for like 5 seconds versus like the 20 odd minute long video. But it's like every comment. So I'm like, shit, oh
yeah,
no. So I
yeah,
end up having to remove it from the video. I made an amendment in the edit section. So I always try to make sure that by and large, what I'm saying is agreeable, or if it's not, I'm supplementing it with enough information for it to, be something people agree with. Like in that polling video, I say some hot takes about the wilderness that people agree or disagree with, but I try to come at it in a reasonable enough way where people can listen to me and say I completely disagree, but I get where you're coming from as a person.
yeah. Okay. So what videos are
Okay.
next with you're thinking of?
So yeah, I always have a lot of videos. I have a notes document and it's like 80 fucking videos on like ideas on it, I should say. Um, So I'm working at two videos right now. One that's like tangential to RuneScape, Old School RuneScape, where I am going to be talking about what World of Warcraft can learn from RuneScape. It's kind of relevant to, this bridge happening right now, but also because these two games are not similar at all. So I'll be specifically talking about it from the idea of like identity. Right now, World of Warcraft, in my opinion, is going through an identity crisis that's really just bizarre and interesting. Like right now, my group Iron Man partner and I, who I've met on World of Warcraft like 10 years ago at this point, we're going through retail WoW, the modern version of the game. We're leveling through it, and we were gonna do like a big video about it, talking about it, and all that kind of stuff. And then I had like 20 pages of notes just from the leveling experience. And for those unaware, the leveling in the game is so fast. It's like 15 hours to max level. I had 20 pages of notes, and I'm like, has to be its own separate thing. And it's specifically about the identity issues. So I'm working on that comparison there. It should be out probably next week. And I'm also simultaneously to that working on a video that's comparing the failures of Kourend with the successes of Varlamore, specifically the failures of Kourend's initial launch, like how Jagex kind of took this huge landmass, accidentally scaled it up apparently, and kind of didn't release it with enough stuff because they just weren't staffed enough to fill it out. And it's like now they have to develop enough confidence in the player base essentially to prove to them that like, hey, we're not going to fuck this up again. So they were fixing it, they changed it, they added new quests, they really invested a lot of time to making Kourend what it is today. And now with Varlamore, they approached it in a multi-part way that's really interesting. And each individual part, I don't think it's controversial to say, has more content than Kourend did on release. So it's like they really kind of figured out the rhythm of a new continent, or at least in addition to a pre-existing one. And I think they've proven to people, even skeptics, that they can do big land masses and do them well. So that's something I'm going to talk about in my following video as well. And the final
Hell
thing
yeah.
I'll say
Yeah.
in regard to video stuff is, I'll always be doing like stuff about MMOs. I'll always be doing stuff about RuneScape. I love this game, so there's a lot to talk about. And I'm trying to reach out to people to get more insight, on stuff I don't understand. So yeah, definitely expect a lot of crazy hot takes and interesting conversations to be had about just the game that people love and monitoring the success it's currently receiving. I'm also kind of debating on doing a video. I'm not sure if you're going to do something about this either, but I'm debating on doing a video talking about RuneScape 3 leagues. I always wanted to do a whole thing where I play RuneScape 3 and I talk about it similar to what I did with my first big popular video. But we'll see if it, captivates me. But I always like giving a lot of time to a game when I talk about it. So maybe RuneScape 3 leagues is the opportunity for me to peep out that game and see if it's any good.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I think RS3 for me is just it's so foreign, even though it's in the same universe and everything. It just feels like it's such a massive amount of time you have to put into it to really appreciate it, I think.
That's
It's
true.
just not something at this point I'm willing to do, even with leagues coming out. But I'm so excited to watch people's experience with leagues,
Yeah.
especially old school players jumping over and seeing what actually is working over there.
There's a lot of issues with that game. A lot of
But there's a
issues.
lot of really cool things too that they
Yes.
do have going on. But yeah, there's
Yeah,
plenty of
agreed.
issues.
And I think that people sometimes conflate those issues, not to go off on a tangent here, but they conflate RuneScape 3's issues with microtransactions. And yes, they are bad. The gambling is very bad, of course. And the cosmetics are really ugly. Yes, of course. I hate overrides and all that kind of shit. But there's so much more issues with that game than people realize from like a systemic standpoint. The amount of bloat, the amount of dailies, hourlies, weeklies, monthlies, all of that stuff is almost more damaging because now you're excited about playing the game and you realize you have to do an hourly every single hour for God knows how many hours just to, get the best experience rates. So it's the Hespori issue of getting the dirt bucket. I'm forgetting what the infinite compost
The
bucket,
bottomless
but
bucket, yeah.
yeah, bottomless bucket. But like with every piece of content, because you're just constantly waiting on the next big hit of XP. That's a really big issue. So that'd be interesting to talk about on a whole separate thing. I respect RuneScape 3. I want it to be successful. I'm not one of those people that thinks that just because, it's EOC, it's bad. I'm super open-minded about that stuff. I really want to explore it. So eventually that'll happen too.
Nice. Well, sick, man. I mean, I know for a fact we could talk endlessly about
Definitely.
so many other topics. We'll definitely have to do a round two. I would love to do
Please.
that. Maybe
Yep.
start like really pinpointing the things we didn't touch on. I mean, we could probably go through like every skill and talk about, issues and things that we do
Oh my
find
God, yeah.
good about
Yeah,
it. But
I
yeah,
am more than happy to do that. Any opportunity to have a interesting conversation about game design is like I jump at that opportunity. I got invited to the little creator Discord thing, and I got to talk to some mods for the first time. That was super interesting insight too, and some of the like pre-existing content creators that reached out. I obviously you and I just had this big conversation. It's been really interesting to talk to people who, not only are they like invested and love the game, but they've also staked a claim in the game. Like this, in many ways, this is many people's careers. So like, yeah, this is something they're very passionate about. So hearing about that, and having big conversations about that is the best. So more than happy to do that.
hell yeah, love to hear it. Yeah, we'll definitely have to do this, and hopefully relatively soon. I think like a part two
Let's
in
do it.
maybe just the coming months would be amazing. So I appreciate you, TheoryWise. This is great. I didn't really hear of your content or your channel until just recently, and I feel like a lot of people are starting to kind of mention your name more and more. So it's cool to have you in the space, and it's also cool that you do have experience with World of Warcraft and other games, so you can kind of bring that sort of like expertise over to OSRs and see what we are doing right over here. So I appreciate your time today. I'm going to have all your links down in the description for those still listening. Go check them out. Definitely give them a sub if you're into that kind of long form discussion based stuff. So if you watch my channel actively, you're going to love his channel. And he actually is a little bit more in depth with it, and he actually writes it out so it feels a little bit more just, I guess, scripted, but in a good way. Like it feels like you really are putting more energy into like your actual thoughts and like your actual arguments. So it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
if you like
Yeah.
video essays, if you're a fan of video essays, if you like watching them on the other monitor while, doing whatever, I feel like it's pretty solid. Check me out. If you don't like it, feel free to disagree in the comment section. Maybe I'll start streaming soon so you can come in and argue with me and I'll become the
Ooh,
first, I don't know, debate bro on Twitch about RuneScape. Who knows? So feel free to do all that.
hell yeah. Okay. Well, it'll all be down there. I appreciate you guys all listening.
Thank
TheoryWise,
you.
thank you once again. And
It's
we
an
will
honor. Thank you so much for having me.
perfect. We'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.
Bye-bye.